I never like working nights on the water. People think the ocean is loud, but after midnight it becomes strangely careful, as if the waves are trying not to wake something sleeping beneath them. My first rotation on an offshore platform began in late autumn. The air carried the smell of salt and old machinery, while tiny drops of mist settled across the metal rails like cold glass. The lights from the platform reached only a short distance before the darkness swallowed them whole. Beyond that, there was nothing. No shore, no houses, no comforting signs that the rest of the world still existed. The older workers spoke very little after sunset. They laughed through the day, argued over coffee, and complained about the weather. But once evening arrived, conversations became shorter. Some stared into the water longer than anyone should. Others quietly closed the curtains before the night shift even began. When I asked why, they only smiled in a way that suggested they had already answered the question years ago. On my third night, the radio crackled with a voice that wasn't scheduled to be there. It sounded calm, almost familiar. It asked a question using my full name. No one else reacted. I checked every channel twice before stepping outside onto the empty deck. The wind had stopped. Even the sea looked strangely still. That's when I saw the light, waiting just beyond the edge of the platform. The first week on the platform arrived in late October. The helicopter left me there just before sunset, and within minutes the coastline had become a thin gray line that slowly disappeared into the evening haze. By the time my bag was unpacked, there was nothing around us except water and sky. The platform rose from the sea like a steel island, bright with floodlights that seemed much stronger from a distance than they ever felt while standing beneath them. The days settled into an easy rhythm. Wait before dawn. Drink coffee that always tasted a little too bitter. Check equipment. Listen to older workers tell the same stories they have been telling for years. I liked routines. My father used to say that routines gave lonely places their shape. He worked around machines most of his life, and he believed every strange noise had an ordinary reason if you waited long enough. I carried that thought with me during daylight. It was easy to believe him. The sea flashed silver beneath the sun. Gulls drifted overhead. Wrenches clinked against railings while distant engines rolled through the structure like slow breathing. Even the endless water felt welcoming in the afternoon. Night changed everything. After midnight, the platform became quieter than I thought possible. Not silent, just careful. People spoke in softer voices. Doors closed gently. Even footsteps seemed to slow, as though no one wanted to wake whatever lived inside the darkness beyond the lights. I noticed that before anyone mentioned it. On my third night shift, I stepped outside carrying a clipboard after checking pressure readings inside the control room. The sky was perfectly clear. Stars stretched from one side of the horizon to the other, bright enough to make the ocean look almost black by comparison. A cool breeze brushed past my face. Then something strange reached me, the fresh smell of rain. I stopped walking. There hadn't been clouds for hours. The deck beneath my boots was completely dry, and every railing felt warm from the lights that had been burning since sunset. Yet the scent lingered around me, clean and familiar, reminded me of evenings back home when storms rolled across empty fields. For a moment, I almost smiled. Then I realized I was the only one reacting to it. Two electricians walked past without lifting their heads. Neither of them slowed down. I looked toward the sea. Nothing. Only darkness beyond the edge of the platform. I finished my inspection and started back toward the living quarters when a pale blue glow caught my eye through one of the windows. At first, I assumed it was another helicopter approaching. The color was wrong. Aircraft lights blinked. This one remained perfectly steady. I turned toward the helipad. The light waited beyond it, not above the platform, not below it, far enough away that I couldn't judge its distance, yet close enough that it felt impossible to ignore. The oddest part wasn't the light itself. It appeared only in the windows. I could see its reflection clearly across the glass panels lining the corridor. When I looked directly over the railing toward the sea, there was nothing there, only dark water, reaching forever. I glanced back at the window. The blue glow remained, calm, unmoving, as though the glass could see something my own eyes could not. A quiet voice interrupted my thoughts. First week? I turned. An older mechanic named Harris stood beside a toolbox with tired eyes and rough hands marked by years of salt and steel. I nodded. He followed my gaze toward the windows. For just a second, something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. He looked away before I could ask anything. "You'll sleep better if you stop looking." That was all he said. I laughed softly. "I don't even know what I'm looking at." His face stayed serious. "Neither did I." The words settled into the night between us. He picked up his toolbox and continued down the walkway without another glance toward the glass. I wanted to call after him. Instead, I remained where I was. The breeze faded. The smell of rain disappeared with it. For several minutes, nothing happened. I convinced myself fatigue was playing tricks on me. Long shifts, a new job, too much coffee. Simple explanations were always easier. My father would have chosen one of them. I started walking again. As I reached the corridor, curiosity pulled my eyes back toward the nearest window. The reflection had moved, only a little. The pale blue glow now rested closer to the edge of the glass, as though it had drifted while I wasn't watching. I hurried outside once more and leaned over the railing. The waves rolled gently beneath me. Moonlight stretched across them in broken pieces. There was no blue light, no boat, no aircraft, nothing that should have created a reflection. A low burst of static came through the radio clipped to my jacket. No one spoke. The channel returned to normal almost immediately. When I looked back at the windows, the glow had become smaller, not dimmer. Farther away, it slipped across one pane after another until it reached the last window overlooking the helipad. Then it vanished. There was no flash, no ripple on the water, no fading trail across the horizon. One moment it existed. The next it was gone, as though someone had quietly erased it from the night. I stood there longer than I needed to. The platform felt ordinary again. Machines continued their work. The sea answered with slow waves against the support legs. Behind me, a door opened and closed as another shift changed, filling the corridor with warm light before it disappeared again. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. Almost, because as I turned toward the living quarters, the clean scent of rain returned for one final breath. Only for a moment. Then the darkness kept it secret. Before sunrise, the sea always looked older. The sky held only a faint strip of pale gray along the horizon, while the rest of the world remained wrapped in darkness. The night shift was almost over, and everyone moved more slowly than usual. Coffee cups sat forgotten on metal tables. The wind had settled, leaving only the quiet splash of small waves against the platform. I stood near the western railing with a pair of binoculars, checking the usual shipping route. Supply boats normally announced themselves over the radio long before they came into view. That morning, the radio stayed quiet. A shape appeared anyway. At first, it was only a darker patch against the water. Then the navigation lights became clear. Green, red, white. Every light on the vessel burned as though someone had just prepared it for docking. I called the bridge. No scheduled arrival? The answer came back almost immediately. Nothing until tomorrow. I lowered the binoculars. The boat continued toward us at a slow, steady pace. Its engine carried across the calm water in a smooth, familiar rhythm. There was nothing unusual about the sound, nothing urgent. It moved exactly as any working supply vessel should. Only one thing felt wrong. No one stood on deck. As it drifted closer, several crew members joined me along the railing. Nobody spoke very much. The captain contacted the vessel over every available channel. There was no reply. The engine never changed speed. By the time the boat reached the platform, dawn had begun washing soft color across the eastern sky. A crane operator lowered the access basket. Two of us crossed first. I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked. Fresh paint marked the rails. Thick ropes rested neatly along the deck. Nothing appeared damaged. The engine continued running with a gentle vibration beneath my boots. It felt almost welcoming. The wheelhouse door stood open. Inside, the controls were active. Radar screens glowed softly. A half-finished chart rested beneath a pencil that looked as though someone had only stepped away for a minute. There was no captain, no crew, no voices, only the low sound of machinery keeping the vessel alive. I walked toward the small galley. Warm air drifted through the doorway. A coffee mug waited beside the sink. Steam no longer rose from it, but when I touched the side of the cup, it still held heat. Someone had been there recently. I looked around the room. A plate with 2 slices of untouched bread remained on the table. One chair had been pushed back halfway, frozen in the middle of an ordinary morning. I called out once. My own voice echoed through the empty passageways before fading away. No answer came back. The sleeping cabins were exactly the same. Beds neatly made, work boots lined against the walls, personal photographs tucked beside bunks. Every room carried the faint scent of old cloth, as though uniforms had spent years drying in salt air. It reminded me of opening my grandfather's closet after he passed away. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was. Memory has a strange way of finding us in lonely places. One cabin caught my attention. A faded blue jacket hung neatly over the back of a wooden chair. The fabric looked worn around the sleeves, as if someone had worn it every day for years. When I reached out to touch it, the material felt cool. The pockets were empty. Nothing about it suggested panic, only absence. I stepped away and continued toward the bridge. Behind me, the jacket swayed once. Very gently, I stopped walking. The windows were closed. There wasn't enough breeze to move it. When I turned back, it hung perfectly still again. I said nothing. Neither did the other worker, searching the lower deck. Perhaps he hadn't seen it. Or perhaps he had decided not to mention it. The captain eventually joined us inside the wheelhouse. He searched every compartment twice before opening the ship's logbook. Several pages had already been filled with routine notes. Weather, fuel, cargo, maintenance checks. Everything looked normal until the final entry. The handwriting remained steady. The sentence did not. 0328 hours. Blue light observed off the port side. Crew instructed to remain. The word stopped there. No period. No signature. Nothing on the following page. The captain quietly closed the book. Nobody suggested finishing the sentence aloud. By then the sun had climbed above the horizon, covering the deck with gentle morning light. The vessel looked even more ordinary than before, almost peaceful. A tow line was attached, so we could secure it beside the platform until authorities arrived. One of the deckhands tightened the line. For a few moments, everything remained perfectly still. Then the rope loosened, not because it snapped, not because anyone released it. It simply slipped free, falling softly across the deck. Before anyone could react, the supply boat began drifting away. Its engine never changed speed. No hand touched the wheel. No person appeared at the controls. The distance between us widened little by little. Someone reached for the radio. Only silence answered. We watched without speaking as the vessel turned by itself toward the open sea. The morning sun reflected across the water in bright ribbons. Yet the empty boat seemed untouched by that warmth. It continued farther from the platform until the details disappeared. The lights remained visible the longest, tiny white points against the endless ocean. Finally, even they faded into the horizon. The sea looked empty once more. Back inside, I couldn't stop thinking about the unfinished sentence in the logbook. I wondered what word the captain had intended to write next. Remain calm. Remain below. Remain together. I suppose I'll never know. Sometimes before dawn, I think about that drifting boat, not because of the missing crew, but because somewhere beyond the horizon, its engine may still be running, waiting for someone to finish a sentence that never found its ending. The afternoon was brighter than most. A clear winter sun rested high above the platform, turning the sea into sheets of silver that stretched in every direction. The wind had almost disappeared, leaving only the gentle wash of water against the support legs far below. After several restless nights, the daylight felt comforting. Routine inspections were assigned after lunch. Mine included checking the emergency lifeboats hanging along the starboard side. It was simple work. Open the hatch, inspect the supplies, test the lights, close everything again. I had done it once already that week, and nothing unusual had happened. As I walked toward the first lifeboat, I found myself thinking about my father again. He believed emergency equipment deserved more respect than the machines people used every day. You never notice the things that save your life, he used to say. You only remember them after something goes wrong. Those words stayed with me as I climbed inside. The hatch closed behind me with a solid click. Sunlight filtered through the small windows, leaving soft bands of light across the orange interior. Rows of vinyl seats lined both sides of the narrow cabin. The safety kits were untouched. Water containers remained sealed. Everything appeared exactly as it should. I checked the battery indicator. Normal. I tested the emergency light. Working. Finally, I reached for my radio. Inspection complete, I said. The reply came back through a burst of static. Then silence. I frowned and adjusted the volume. Another wave of interference rolled through the speaker before fading away. I tried again. No answer. Thinking the signal was weak inside the enclosed cabin, I switched the radio off completely and clipped it back to my belt. The quiet felt unusually heavy. Not frightening. Only different. Then I heard voices. At first they were so faint I thought they came from workers outside. I leaned toward one of the windows. No one stood on the deck. The conversations continued anyway. Soft whispers drifted through the cabin. Several voices. Too low to understand. They didn't sound rushed or angry. They sounded like people talking in another room with the door almost closed. I stayed perfectly still. The sound seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. From the ceiling, from beneath the seats, from the narrow walls around me. I told myself it had to be the wind moving through the vents. That explanation lasted less than a minute. The whispers became clearer, not louder, closer. Someone laughed quietly. Another voice answered. I could almost make out the words, but every sentence slipped away before I understood it. A chill passed through the cabin. I rubbed my hands together. Then I noticed something that made even less sense. The vinyl seat beside me felt warm. Not slightly warm. Comfortably warm, as though someone had been sitting there only moments earlier. I placed my hand on another seat. Cold. The next one. Cold. Only that single place held warmth. I stood and moved farther down the aisle. The whispering stopped. For one long moment, there was nothing except my own breathing. Then one voice spoke clearly. My boy. My chest tightened. I knew those words. I had heard them countless times as a child whenever my father wanted my attention, without raising his voice. My boy, the whisper repeated. Never rush towards something you don't understand. I closed my eyes. Those were his exact words. Not almost. Exactly. He had said them before teaching me how to repair old engines in our garage. He always smiled afterward, wiping grease from his hands with the same faded towel. I hadn't thought about that afternoon in years. When I opened my eyes, the cabin looked unchanged. The rows of seats, the emergency supplies, the narrow windows filled with bright daylight. Everything was ordinary, except for the silence. It no longer felt empty. It felt as though someone had finished speaking and was waiting for my answer. I swallowed and reached for the hatch. The handle refused to move. I pulled harder. Nothing. The locking wheel remained fixed in place. I knocked once against the metal. Is someone out there? No reply. I knocked again. The sound echoed to the small cabin before fading into complete quiet. A strange thought crossed my mind. What if nobody knew I was inside? I pushed it away immediately. People had seen me begin the inspection. Someone would notice eventually. Still, the minutes seemed longer than they should have been. I checked the emergency release. It moved freely. The hatch did not. Behind me, one of the seat belts shifted with a soft rustle. I turned. Every belt hung exactly where it belonged. The warm seat had cooled. Whatever comfort it held was gone. A faint knock reached the outside of the hatch. 3 gentle taps. I smiled with relief. Coming, I called. The locking will turn by itself. Slowly. The hatch opened just enough for daylight to spill inside. No one stood there. The deck outside was completely empty. A light breeze brushed across the opening, carrying the clean scent of salt and fresh paint. I climbed out carefully, looking both directions along the walkway. Nothing. No footsteps. No workers. No voices, just the distant calls of seabirds circling above the sea. I closed the hatch behind me. Before I could take more than 2 steps, a heavy metallic click sounded at my back. I turned around. The hatch had locked itself again. This time from the outside. I stared at the closed door for several seconds. I thought about opening it. Instead, I rested one hand on the smooth metal and listened. Not a single whisper remained. Only a silence that felt just a little too complete. Then I walked away without looking back. The drive to the harbor always began before dawn. My next rotation was scheduled for early spring, and the highway was almost empty except for the occasional freight truck rolling through the darkness. A light drizzle had passed during the night, leaving the pavement dark and shining beneath my headlights. I had been awake since 3 a.m, and the warmth inside the truck made it difficult to keep my eyes from growing heavy. I lowered the window a little. Cool air slipped inside, carrying the scent of damp leaves from the trees lining the road. It helped for a while, but not enough. A small yellow sign appeared ahead. Hot coffee, open all night. I didn't remember seeing it before. The harbor was still nearly 40 minutes away, and I decided a short stop wouldn't hurt. My father used to insist that tired drivers made poor decisions. Whenever we traveled together, he would pull over for coffee long before either of us admitted we needed it. I smiled at the memory and turned into the gravel parking lot. Only 4 cars were parked outside. Each one looked older than the last. Their paint faded beneath the soft glow spilling from the diner's windows. A brass bell rang gently as I stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around me at once. The room carried the rich smell of burning coffee, mixed with toasted bread and old wooden tables polished smooth by countless hands. A row of booths stretched along the windows, while a long counter disappeared into the quiet kitchen beyond. Every seat was occupied, not by large groups, just individuals. Each person sat alone. No one was eating. No one was speaking. Every face was turned toward the television, hanging in the corner of the room. The waitress greeted me with a tired smile. Long drive. I nodded, heading to work. She poured coffee into a thick white mug without asking what I wanted. The cup felt pleasantly hot between my hands. I thanked her. She only smiled again before returning behind the counter. I took a slow sip. It tasted stronger than any coffee I had ever had, with a bitter edge that lingered long after I swallowed. Somehow, it reminded me of the mornings my mother spent roasting beans in our small kitchen when I was a child. It was comforting in a way I couldn't explain. The television continued playing. At first, I wasn't paying attention. Then I noticed the weather map. The colors looked oddly familiar. Cities appeared where they should. The coastline was correct. But the date in the corner of the screen made me pause. March 18th, 10 years earlier. I frowned. Perhaps it was an old recording. The weather presenter calmly described a storm moving across the coast. She spoke with complete confidence. Behind me, every customer watched without blinking. Not one of them looked at a phone. Not one reached for a meal. Only the television held their attention. The waitress noticed me staring. "Storm's coming," she said quietly. I glanced toward the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten. There wasn't a cloud in sight. "I think that forecast a little old," I replied with a small laugh. She looked toward the screen. "It arrives eventually." There was something gentle about the way she said it. Not like a warning, more like a memory. Before I could ask what she meant, the front door opened. A man in a dark raincoat stepped inside. Drops of water clung to the shoulders of his coat, although the parking lot outside remained perfectly dry. He removed his hat, looked around the room once, then quietly took the only empty booth near the back. No one acknowledged him. The waitress did not offer him a menu. He simply folded his hands on the table and watched the television with everyone else. A faint chill passed through me. I finished my coffee more quickly than I intended. When I reached for my wallet, the waitress shook her head. "It's already been taken care of." "By who?" She looked toward the window instead of answering. I followed her gaze. The parking lot was empty. Every car I had noticed earlier was gone. I blinked. Surely I would have heard engines. The room itself had also changed. Only 2 customers remained. The others had disappeared without a sound. I stood slowly. How long have I been here? The waitress wiped the counter with a folded towel. Long enough. The answer settled uneasily in my mind. I thanked her anyway and stepped outside. The morning sun rested higher than it should have been. According to my dashboard clock, nearly 2 hours had passed. The harbor was now only 15 minutes away. That wasn't possible. I had barely finished a single cup of coffee. The rest of the drive felt strangely quiet. I reached the docks just as the crew began boarding the helicopter. No one mentioned my late arrival. In fact, according to the supervisor, I was exactly on time. For weeks, I convinced myself exhaustion had blurred my memory. Work kept my thoughts busy. The sea had its own mysteries. I stopped thinking about the diner until my next rotation. Curious more than anything else, I left home an hour earlier and followed the same highway. The yellow sign was gone. So was the gravel parking lot. I slowed the truck. On one side of the road stood a thick line of pine trees. On the other was an empty field covered in wild grass. There was no building, no tire tracks, no power lines, only open ground stretching toward the woods. I parked on the shoulder and walked a short distance into the field. The grass reached my knees, moving gently with the breeze. Nothing suggested a restaurant had ever existed there. I stood quietly for several minutes. Then, far off in the distance, carried so lightly I almost mistook it for the wind, I heard the faint ringing of a brass bell. Just once, as though someone had opened a door that no longer belonged to this road. The storm reached us just before sunset. Gray clouds gathered low over the sea, swallowing the last strips of blue sky one piece at a time. Rain struck the windows in steady waves, and the helicopter scheduled to collect us turned back before it ever came into view. The platform swayed gently beneath the weight of the weather, while every loose cable sang its own quiet note in the wind. By evening, the supervisor gathered the crew in the mess hall. A service boat would take us to a nearby island. An old lighthouse stood there, built long before the offshore platforms arrived. It had been abandoned for years, but its walls were solid enough to shelter us until the storm eased. No one seemed excited by the idea. Most simply nodded and collected their jackets. Only Harris, the older mechanic, hesitated. His eyes lingered on the map spread across the table. That place should have stayed empty, he murmured. I looked at him. You've been there? He zipped his coat without meeting my eyes. Once. Nothing more. The ride across the water was rough. Rain drummed against the cabin roof while waves lifted the boat and dropped it again with slow, heavy force. Salt spray settled across the windows until the island appeared as little more than a dark shape rising from the sea. The lighthouse stood alone on the highest point. Its white paint had long since faded into dull gray, and long cracks climbed the tower like old scars. Even from the shoreline, it looked forgotten. The rain eased as we climbed the stone path. The wind faded too. It was strange. The storm continued all around the island, yet the hills surrounding the lighthouse felt oddly sheltered, as though the weather simply chose not to cross that final stretch. The heavy front door opened with surprising ease. Inside, the air felt dry. Dust floated lazily through the pale beam of my flashlight. The place carried the faint scent of dried flowers. It reminded me of the small vase my grandmother kept beside her bedroom window. Every spring she filled it with lavender, refusing to throw the faded stems away because, as she liked to say, memories deserved a place to rest. For a moment, the lighthouse didn't seem frightening at all, just lonely. The first floor held little more than broken chairs, empty shelves, and a narrow staircase curling upward to the center of the tower. Our crew spread out to check the rooms. Someone found old blankets. Another worker managed to start a portable heater. People spoke quietly, grateful simply to be out of the rain. Then the light appeared. Not outside. Above us, a slow beam swept across the dusty walls. Once, then again, every head tilted upward. The lighthouse beacon was turning. No one moved. There isn't any power here, one of the electricians whispered. He was right. The control panels downstairs had long since rusted beyond repair. Even the wiring had been stripped away years earlier. Yet overhead, the great lantern continued its steady circle, sending pale light through cracks in the tower, round and round, never speeding up, never slowing down. Harris closed his eyes. I hoped it had stopped. No one asked what he meant. The staircase seemed taller than before. After several minutes, curiosity overcame caution. 3 of us volunteered to inspect the lantern room. Our flashlights traced slow circles across the walls as we climbed. Each step echoed softly through the hollow tower. The higher we climbed, the quieter everything became. Even the storm outside faded, until only our breathing remained. Halfway up, I heard something else. Footsteps, very soft. Above us, someone was walking. 1 step, then another. The pace never changed. Not hurried, not dragging. Simply circling the lantern room overhead. We stopped climbing. The footsteps continued. I looked toward the others. They had heard them too. No one spoke. The beam from the lighthouse swept past one of the narrow windows, briefly washing the staircase in cold white light before moving on. The footsteps never missed a beat. We reached the final landing. The lantern room stood only a few feet away. Its wooden door hung slightly open. The walking continued inside. I could hear shoes crossing old floorboards, around and around, as though someone had spent years following the same endless path. I pushed the door gently. It swung inward without resistance. The room was empty. The enormous glass lenses reflected our flashlight beams in strange patterns across the walls. Dust covered every surface. The machinery connecting the beacon had seized long ago beneath layers of rust. Nothing inside should have moved. Yet above us, the great light continued turning. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the climb itself. One of the electricians slowly circled the room. "There isn't anyone here." His voice sounded smaller than usual. Harris never entered. He remained standing in the doorway, staring at the floor. "I saw someone," he said quietly. "Years ago. I waited." He took a slow breath. "I climbed these same stairs during another storm." His eyes lifted toward the lantern. "I heard those same footsteps." Another pause. "When I opened the door." He stopped speaking. "What did you see?" I asked. He shook his head once. "You don't want my answer." No one pressed him again. We searched every corner before making our way downstairs. The storm had weakened outside. The others were already preparing to leave. No one mentioned staying until morning anymore. As we walked toward the front entrance, I looked back one last time. The beacon completed another slow turn. Its pale light crossed the empty staircase before disappearing again. I was the last person to step outside. The cool night air greeted me with the distant sound of waves below the cliffs. I reached for the heavy wooden door and pulled it closed behind me. It latched with a deep, hollow thud. The boat had already begun loading the crew. I took only a few steps down the path before I heard another sound from inside the lighthouse. Not footsteps, not the beacon. A single door, somewhere high above us, closed gently on its own. No one turned around. Neither did I. The sea looked restless long before the weather changed. My 6th week on the platform began with heavy swells rolling in from the open ocean. There was no storm overhead. The sky remained bright, and the forecast promised calm conditions for the next 2 days. Yet every few minutes, larger waves rose from nowhere, lifting the platform with slow, uneven motions before fading away again. The older workers noticed it. They simply didn't talk about it. I spent most of that morning checking support equipment along the lower deck. Every so often, I paused to watch the water. The waves broke against the massive steel legs beneath us, sending white spray into the air before sliding back into the sea. Everything looked ordinary, until the tide pulled away. For only a few seconds, the water dropped lower than I had ever seen it. Dark shapes appeared beneath the surface. Not rocks, not drifting debris. Footprints. They crossed the seabed in a long line beneath the platform. Each one was enormous, far larger than any diving bell or anchor could have made. The impressions were spaced so evenly that my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. They looked like footsteps, leading from one side of the ocean floor to the other. Then another wave rolled in. The water climbed back over them, hiding everything once again. I blinked several times. When I looked at the others nearby, 2 deckhands were staring into the water with the same uneasy expression. Neither of us spoke. There seemed to be nothing worth saying. After lunch, the supervisor ordered a routine inspection of the support columns. One of our divers, a quiet man named Lewis, prepared his equipment without complaint. He had worked underwater for nearly 20 years. Nothing seemed to rattle him. Before climbing into the water, he gave me a tired smile. "If I'm not back in half an hour, finish my sandwich." I laughed. He always made the same joke. Watching him disappear beneath the surface felt strangely different that day. The water swallowed him almost immediately. Only the bubbles rising from below marked where he had gone. The waiting began. The deck felt warm beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere above us, a gull cried once before disappearing into the distance. I checked my watch. 10 minutes. 15. 20. The communication line remained quiet. Finally, Lewis's voice crackled to the headset worn by the dive supervisor. It came in broken pieces. "Support looks normal." A pause. Then breathing. Slow. Uneven. Another burst of static interrupted him. When his voice returned, it had changed. Much softer. "I can see." The sentence stopped. Everyone waited. Another long silence followed. The supervisor pressed a microphone. "Lewis, report." No answer. Only the sound of water moving against the microphone. Then his breathing became quicker. I thought they were rocks. Nobody moved. "What did you find?" the supervisor asked. Lewis didn't answer the question. Instead, he whispered something that barely reached us. "They're walking." The line went silent. Within seconds, emergency procedures began. The recovery cable tightened. Crew members pulled steadily, drawing the diver back toward the surface. No one spoke while we waited. The cable rose through the water. Lewis broke the surface moments later. He climbed onto the platform without assistance. His face had lost every trace of color. Hands trembling, he removed his mask but said nothing. The supervisor wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "What happened?" Lewis looked toward the sea. "Not at us. The lights." "What lights?" "The floodlights under the platform." His voice remained barely above a whisper. "I saw something move through them." He swallowed. It wasn't swimming. Nobody interrupted him. It walked between the columns. The words hung in the air. I only saw the legs. His breathing became unsteady again. They never reached the surface. Someone offered him water. He accepted the bottle but never drank from it. Instead, he stood there watching the ocean as though expecting something to return. That evening, maintenance crews checked every underwater camera attached to the platform. The recording showed nothing unusual, only drifting fish, floating sand, moving currents, no footprints, no shape, no sign of anything passing through the floodlights. Lewis refused to watch the footage. "I know what I saw." No one argued with him. The next morning arrived clear and bright. Most of us hoped the strange mood had passed with the night. I stepped outside just after sunrise. The ocean looked calmer than it had in days. Golden light spread across the water. For the first time in nearly a week, I felt myself relax. Then the platform gave a faint shiver. Not enough to throw anyone off balance. Just enough to notice. A second vibration followed a few moments later. Then another, evenly spaced, far apart, as though something unimaginably large was taking slow steps somewhere deep below us. No one needed to point it out. Every worker on the deck stopped what they were doing at almost the same moment. Coffee cups remained suspended halfway to waiting hands. Conversations ended in the middle of sentences. The vibrations continued. Steady, unhurried. The sea itself appeared perfectly calm. No towering waves. No breaking water. Only those distant, measured impacts reaching us through the steel structure. Lewis quietly packed his gear. The supervisor asked if he was preparing for another inspection. He shook his head. "I'm done diving." That surprised everyone. He had spent most of his life beneath the water. Leaving wasn't like him. He signed the paperwork before lunch. By evening, a helicopter carried him away from the platform. I watched until it disappeared into clouds. He never looked back. Just before sunset, I walked to the western railing where I had first seen the pale blue light days earlier. The water below reflected the fading colors of the sky. Everything seemed peaceful again, almost enough to make me believe the footprints had been an illusion. Then the platform trembled once more, very gently, very far below. One slow step, followed by another. They continued long after the sun had climbed fully above the horizon, and for the first time since arriving offshore, I found myself hoping the sea would never become clear enough for us to see what was making them. Night shifts always felt longer inside the control room. There were no windows large enough to remind you that the sea still surrounded the platform. Only rows of quiet monitors, glowing gauges, and the steady rhythm of equipment doing the same work it had done every hour of every day. Outside, the wind had settled after sunset. Inside, the room held a gentle warmth that carried the faint scent of candle wax from an old emergency lantern stored on a shelf near the door. I had drawn the midnight shift alone. Most people disliked it. I didn't mind. The quiet gave me time to think. I found myself turning a small wrench over my hand, a habit I had picked up from my father. Whenever he was thinking through a difficult repair, he always kept a tool in his fingers. Years later, I had started doing the same thing without ever noticing. The clock above the radio console read 12:41. Routine reports came and went. A weather station checked in. A cargo ship reported its position many miles away. Everything sounded exactly as it should. Then every speaker in the room fell silent, not with a click. More like a long breath had been drawn from the air. I looked up from the logbook. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Static rolled gently through the radio. A voice followed. Calm, clear, platform Delta. This is emergency traffic. I reached for my headset. This is platform Delta. Go ahead. There was no reply to my answer. Instead, the voice continued as if it had never heard me. Time of incident 0114. I frowned. It wasn't even 1 o'clock yet. The message continued. North pressure valve reports a temporary drop lasting 12 seconds. I looked automatically toward the pressure display. Every reading remained normal. I wrote the message down anyway. Old habit. Maybe another station had cross frequencies. Exactly 33 minutes later, the alarm above the north pressure monitor chimed once. The needle dipped. Not much, only for 12 seconds. Then it returned to normal. I stared at the display. The room suddenly felt much quieter than before. I checked my notes. The time matched perfectly. My mouth had gone dry. I told myself it was coincidence. Machines fail. Pressure changes. It happened often enough. Still, I looked back at the radio, waiting. At 1:18, the speaker crackled again. The same voice. Steady, without emotion. Maintenance crew will report a loose handrail near the eastern stairwell. The transmission ended. Nothing more. I rubbed my forehead. The eastern stairwell was 2 levels below me. I almost ignored the message. Almost. Instead, I called one of the night technicians. A few minutes later, he answered. You won't believe this. What? The handrail's loose. I didn't answer immediately. It wasn't during yesterday's inspection. I know. His voice sounded puzzled. We're fixing it now. The line went quiet. I slowly placed the microphone back on its stand. The wrench in my hand suddenly felt heavier. By now, coincidence no longer seemed like a comfortable explanation. The radio remained silent for nearly 20 minutes. I kept watching the clock. Each second sounded louder than the last. Finally, the speaker came alive once more. A soft wave of static drifted through the room. Then the voice returned. This time, something about it caught my attention. Not the words, the tone. It sounded familiar, very familiar. I leaned closer. At 0226, the speaker paused. The operator will spill coffee across the maintenance log. Without thinking, I looked at the mug beside my notebook. It sat safely near the edge of the desk. I smiled despite myself. Not this time. I whispered. I picked it up and moved it across the room, far from every document. Satisfied, I returned to my chair. 5 minutes later, someone knocked gently on the control room door. A mechanic stepped inside, carrying a box of replacement fuses. You asked for these? I didn't. He looked confused. Sorry, Wrong room. As he turned to leave, his shoulder brushed the corner of the desk. The maintenance log slid forward. My elbow reached out to catch it. Instead, my sleeve caught the handle of another mug I had completely forgotten about. It tipped. Coffee spread across the open pages, exactly as the radio had described. The mechanic apologized several times. I barely heard him. After he left, I cleaned the pages as best I could. The stain remained. Dark, uneven, impossible to ignore. Outside, the platform carried on with its ordinary work. Inside, the radio waited. At 2:40, it spoke again. The words arrived more slowly. Do not go outside at 0310. A chill settled over me. I checked the time. Half an hour remained. I stayed in my chair. No matter what happened, I wasn't leaving the room. The minutes crawled by. At exactly 3:09, every light flickered once. Only once. The backup systems engaged immediately. An alarm sounded from somewhere down the corridor. Training took over. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and hurried toward the door. The moment my hand reached the handle, I froze. The radio. Its warning. I stepped back. Another technician ran past the window outside. A few seconds later, the lights returned. The alarm stopped. The emergency lasted less than a minute. If I had gone outside, I wasn't sure why that thought frightened me so much. When I returned to my desk, the speaker gave one final burst of static. The room became perfectly quiet. Then the voice spoke again. Only 4 words. Almost a whisper. You're listening carefully now. My heart pounded. For the first time all night, I truly recognized the voice. It wasn't simply familiar. It was mine. The same calm tone. The same slow pace. Even the slight pause before certain words. I reached for the microphone with trembling fingers. Who is this? Nothing. The transmission had ended. I listened for several more minutes. No answer came. Only the distant sound of ordinary radio traffic returning from other stations across the sea. My shift ended shortly after sunrise. I handed over my notes without mentioning the voice. No one would have believed me. As I walked toward the sleeping quarters, the radio clip to my belt gave one soft crackle. A whisper drifted through the speaker. Only 2 words. My own voice, saying my name. The drive home always felt strange after a long rotation. After weeks surrounded by ocean, steel, and endless horizon, normal roads seemed almost unreal. Trees felt too close. Buildings appeared too tall. The simple sight of traffic lights and gas stations made me feel like I had returned to a world I had forgotten. I left the harbor just after midnight. The highway was nearly empty. A thin layer of mist rested above the road, catching the glow from my headlights. The radio played quietly in the background, but I barely listened. My mind was still somewhere offshore, replaying the things I had seen, and the things I had chosen not to explain. The empty supply boat, the voice on the radio, the light beyond the platform. I told myself distance would make everything feel normal again. Usually it did. The first hour of driving passed without anything unusual. The heater filled the truck with warm air. The tires moved steadily across the pavement. The familiar scent of motor oil from the old vehicle reminded me of my father's garage. He had owned the truck before me. He always kept a small toolbox behind the passenger seat, even when there was no reason to carry one. Machines tell you when something is wrong, he used to say. You just have to learn how to listen. I smiled at the memory. Then I entered the first tunnel. It was a short one, less than a minute across. But halfway through, I noticed something unusual. The passenger seat moved. Not much, just enough for the leather to shift. I glanced toward it. The seat was empty. I looked back at the road. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I waited until I reached the other side before looking again. Nothing. I laughed quietly. Long shifts, little sleep. A tired mind can create strange things. That explanation worked. For about 20 minutes. Then another tunnel appeared. This one was longer. The lights above the road passed over my windshield in a steady pattern. 1, 2, 3, then darkness. As soon as the truck entered the center of the tunnel, the passenger's seatbelt lifted. Slowly, the strap moved across the seat as if someone had reached for it. The buckle clicked. I stared. My foot pressed harder against the accelerator. I told myself there was a mechanical reason. A loose belt, a bump in the road. Anything simple. Anything normal. When I exited the tunnel, the seatbelt returned to its original position. I pulled over at the next rest area. The parking lot was empty, except for one truck parked near the far end. I stepped outside. Cold air met me immediately. I opened the passenger door and checked everything. The seatbelt worked perfectly. The seat was clean. No bags. No tools. Nothing unusual. I stood there for a moment, feeling slightly embarrassed. There was nobody around. No one to explain myself to. Still, I felt the need to say something aloud. Get some sleep? The words sounded strange in the empty parking lot. I returned to the truck and continued driving. For the next hour, I avoided tunnels whenever possible. I took longer roads, slower roads, anything that kept me beneath open sky. Eventually, I convinced myself it was over. Then I reached the mountain pass. The road ahead disappeared into a long tunnel carved through the rock. There was no alternate route. I slowed before entering. The lights above the entrance flickered once, then steadied. I gripped the steering wheel. The tunnel swallowed the truck. The world outside vanished. The radio lost signal. Only the sound of the engine remained. Then came the smell. Motor oil. Strong. Fresh. The same smell that filled my father's garage every weekend when I was young. I looked toward the passenger seat. Empty. But this time, I noticed something different. The seat cushion was pressed down, like someone was sitting there. I didn't turn my head fully. I don't know why. Maybe fear. Maybe instinct. Maybe some part of me understood that seeing something clearly would make it real. I kept my eyes on the road. The seatbelt clicked again. A quiet, careful sound. The same sound a person makes when they buckle themselves in before a journey. My breathing slowed. I waited. Nothing happened. No voice. No movement. Only the steady motion of the truck moving through the tunnel. When I finally reached the exit, sunlight appeared ahead. The pressure inside the cabin changed. The smell disappeared. The seat lifted. Empty again. I pulled onto the shoulder and turned off the engine. For several minutes, I sat there watching cars pass in the distance. I thought about calling someone. My family, a friend, anyone who could make the experience feel smaller. But what would I say? That something invisible had been sitting beside me? That an empty seat had felt occupied? It sounded impossible. So I stayed quiet. The rest of the drive passed without incident. I arrived home shortly after sunrise. My house looked exactly as I had left it. The same curtains, the same porch light, the same familiar driveway. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. I carried my bag inside and placed my keys on the table. Then I noticed something. A small object resting on the passenger seat of my truck. I hadn't seen it before. I walked back outside. It was an old metal keychain, one I recognized immediately. My father's. I had lost it years ago. I picked it up carefully. The metal was cold. The strange thing was not that it was there. The strange thing was the way it had been placed. Perfectly centered. Right where a passenger would leave something before stepping away. I stood beside the truck, holding the keychain in my hand. I wanted to look inside again. I wanted to check the seat. I wanted an answer, but I didn't. Some questions feel safer when they remain unanswered. So I closed the door gently, and as I walked toward the house, I heard one quiet sound behind me, the passenger seatbelt fastening itself. The buoy appeared on a night when the ocean was completely calm. That was the first thing I remembered. Not the light, not the strange colors, not even the shape beneath the water. The calmness. After everything I had experienced offshore, I had learned that the quietest nights were often the ones that stayed with you the longest. It was early winter. The platform had been operating normally for several days, and the crew had almost returned to their usual routines. People stopped talking about strange radio messages. The old lighthouse became another story nobody mentioned. Even Lewis, the diver who had left after seeing something beneath the platform, slowly became a distant memory. We wanted normal. For a while we had it. My shift began at 11 that evening. I was assigned to monitor navigation equipment and weather conditions. The work was repetitive, but I enjoyed the stillness of the control room. There was comfort in watching numbers remain where they belonged. The ocean outside the windows was dark and smooth. No storm, no heavy waves, no warning. Around midnight, a small light appeared on the eastern monitor, a navigation buoy. At first, I didn't think much of it. Buoys were common in the area, but this one was different. The location didn't match our records. I checked the database twice. Nothing. No registration. No maintenance reports. No reason for it to be there. I called the communications desk. Do we have a new buoy east of our position? A few seconds passed. No. The answer came quickly. Nothing has been placed there. I looked back at the screen. The signal continued, blinking, waiting. I zoomed in on the camera feed. The buoy floated alone in the distance. Its shape was difficult to see through the darkness, but the light on top was impossible to miss. It wasn't the usual red or white signal. It changed, blue, green, then a color I couldn't describe. Something between silver and violet. I watched for several minutes. Every cycle repeated exactly. 3 flashes, a pause, 2 flashes, then silence. I wrote down the pattern. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because writing something down made it feel less impossible. The next morning, I mentioned it to my closest friend on the platform, Daniel. He had worked offshore almost as long as I had. He was the kind of person who laughed at ghost stories, but never mocked anyone for believing them. When I showed him the coordinates, his expression changed. That's not on any chart. You sure? He nodded. I checked this route last week. He looked toward the window. The water there is deeper than it should be. That sentence stayed with me, not because it explained anything, because it didn't. That night, we watched the buoy together. Midnight arrived. The light began again. 3 flashes. Pause. 2 flashes. Then the strange color. Daniel grabbed the binoculars. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he lowered them. Look at the water. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Only the reflection of the blinking light. Then another flash crossed the surface. For a brief moment, the water beneath the buoy became visible. Something moved below it. Not a shadow. Not a fish. Something larger. The shape passed slowly beneath the surface. Too deep to identify and too large to ignore. The birds noticed it too. A group of seabirds had been resting nearby. When the buoy flashed again, they scattered immediately. Every single one. No hesitation. No circling back. They simply flew away from that area as fast as they could. Daniel lowered the binoculars. Birds don't do that. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. The next morning, the crew disconnected power from the monitoring system connected to the buoy. There was no reason for the signal to continue. But at midnight, the light returned. Same location, same pattern, same impossible colors. The technicians checked equipment again. Everything showed the same result. The buoy was transmitting, but it had no power source, no visible cables, no battery compartment, nothing that made sense. The supervisor ordered us to stop monitoring it. He said staring at something unknown never made it easier to understand. I agreed. At least I wanted to. But curiosity has a quiet way of returning. 3 nights later, I found myself standing near the observation window again. The buoy waited in the distance. The sea was completely still. The platform lights reflected across the water. Everything looked peaceful, almost beautiful. Then the first flash appeared. Blue. The second. Green. The third. That impossible color. For a brief moment, the water below the buoy brightened, and I saw them. Shapes, several of them, moving together. Not swimming, not floating, almost as if they were following the light. I stepped away from the window. The room suddenly felt too small. The radio beside me turned on by itself. Only static came through. Then a voice. Not words, just a low sound, like someone trying to speak from very far away. I reached for the power switch. The radio went silent. I looked back toward the ocean. The buoy light continued. It didn't matter that we disconnected it. It didn't matter that we removed the equipment. It didn't matter that nobody wanted to watch anymore. The signal remained, every night, at the exact same time, months later. After leaving the platform, I searched for that location on every map I could find. Nothing appeared. No buoy, no warning marker, no record that anything had ever existed there. But sometimes when I stand near the shore after midnight, I notice something strange. A distant light blinking far out on the water. 3 times. A pause. Then 2. And I always look away before the final flash. Because some part of me still wonders what might be waiting beneath the surface when the light finishes its message. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. One moment, the harbor was covered in soft evening light. The next, dark clouds rolled over the water, and the wind began pushing against every window in the small terminal building. My transfer flight had been delayed, and the crew coordinator informed me that I would need to spend the night nearby until conditions improved. I didn't mind. After everything that had happened offshore, one quiet night on land sounded almost comforting. The harbor town was small, almost too small. Most shops were already closed when I arrived, and the streets were nearly empty. Rain tapped gently against my jacket as I walked toward the only motel still showing a light. A faded wooden sign hung above the entrance. Harbor Rest Motel. The letters were missing paint, and one corner of the sign moved slightly in the wind. Inside, the lobby smelled like old furniture and polished wood. A small bell sat on the front desk. I rang it once. After several seconds, an elderly receptionist appeared from a back room. She looked surprised to see me. "Need a room?" I nodded, just for tonight. She opened a large paper ledger instead of using computer. The pages were yellowed at the edges. She ran her finger down the list. Room 14. She handed me a key. The metal tag was scratched and worn. I noticed there were no other keys hanging behind the desk. Only that one. Busy night. I asked. She looked toward the rain-covered windows. Not anymore. I wasn't sure what she meant. The motel hallway was narrow and quiet. Old carpet covered the floor. The lights above me flickered gently as I walked toward the room. 14 was at the end of the hall. The key turned easily. Inside, everything looked clean. Not modern, not comfortable, but clean. A wooden dresser stood against the wall. A small table rested near the window. An old lamp cast a soft yellow glow across the room. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Polished cedar. And something else. Paper. Old letters. It reminded me of my grandmother's house, where every drawer seemed to contain forgotten envelopes tied together with faded string. The memory was strangely comforting. I placed my bag beside the bed and sat down. For the first time in weeks, there were no machines running nearby, no ocean beneath me, no strange lights, just rain against the window. I almost slept immediately. Then I noticed the photographs. There were several frames placed on the dresser. I assumed they belonged to previous guests. A family vacation, a wedding, a group of friends. But when I looked closer, something felt wrong. The people in the photographs were strangers, yet their clothes were familiar, too familiar. One man stood beside an old car wearing the same jacket I had left at home. A woman sitting beside a lake wore a shirt identical to one I owned. Another photograph showed a person standing outside this very motel, wearing my old work boots. I picked up the frame. The picture was faded. The person's face was unclear, but the clothing was unmistakable. I placed it back carefully. My first thought was simple. A coincidence. There had to be a normal explanation. Maybe the motel owner collected random photographs. Maybe someone with similar clothes had stayed there. Anything was easier than the alternative. I decided not to think about it. I turned off the lamp. The room became dark except for the streetlight outside. Rain continued falling. Eventually, sleep came. At least I thought it did. I woke some time later. Not because of the sound, because the room felt different. The lamp was on. I was certain I had turned it off. I sat up slowly. The photographs on the dresser looked different from before. Not the images, the arrangement. They had been moved. The frame I had picked up earlier now stood in the center, facing the bed. I stared at it. The person inside the photograph appeared clearer now. Not enough to recognize the face, but enough to notice the position. The figure was no longer standing near the car. It was standing beside the motel room door. My door. I looked away. I didn't want to study it longer. Some things become more frightening the longer you try to understand them. I got dressed quickly and left the room. The hallway was empty. The receptionist sat behind the desk, reading a newspaper. She looked up. "You leaving already?" I nodded. "Bad sleep?" She didn't seem surprised. I placed the key on the desk. She looked at it for a moment, then at me. "Did you open the closet?" I frowned. "No." Her expression softened. "Good." I wanted to ask why. I wanted to ask about the photographs, about the room, about everything. But the question stayed inside my head. Sometimes, asking for an answer means accepting whatever answer comes back. I walked outside. The rain had stopped. The morning air felt fresh and cold. Before leaving, I looked back at the motel. Room 14 was at the end of the hallway. Its curtains were open. A figure stood behind the glass. I froze. For a second, I thought it was a receptionist. Then I remembered. She was inside the lobby. I looked again. The curtain moved. The figure was gone. I returned to the truck and drove away. Weeks later, curiosity brought me back to the same town. I wanted to see the motel again. Maybe explain it. Maybe prove to myself that exhaustion had created something strange. But the street looked different. Where the motel should have been, there was only an empty lot. No sign. No building. No driveway. I stopped and checked the address. It was correct. An older man nearby noticed me looking around. Looking for something? I pointed toward the empty space. The Harbor Rest Motel. He stared at me, then slowly shook his head. That place closed years ago. I didn't answer. I simply looked back at the empty lot. The wind moved through the grass. Nothing else. No building. No lights. No room 14. That night, when I returned home, I found something sitting beside my front door. A small metal key, with a faded number attached. I never tried the key. I never wanted to know what door it opened. Because sometimes the safest thing you can do with a mystery is leave it locked. The helicopter ride was supposed to be routine. That was what everyone called it. Routine. A simple transfer from one platform to another before the evening weather arrived. The flight path was familiar. The pilot had flown the route hundreds of times. The crew sat quietly behind me, wearing the same expressions people wear when they have done something so often that they no longer think about it. I sat beside the window. I always preferred the window seat. Not because I enjoyed heights. Because after spending so much time offshore, I liked seeing the ocean from above. From that distance, the water looked peaceful. It was easier to forget how endless it really was. The morning started clear. A soft layer of clouds rested below us, stretching across the horizon like a white field. Sunlight reflected from the helicopter glass, warming my face as the engine carried us farther from the platform. For the first 20 minutes, nothing felt unusual. The pilot checked his instruments. The crew talked quietly. I watched waves disappear beneath the clouds. Then the helicopter entered a strange formation, a perfect circle. At first, I thought it was an opening in the clouds. A gap where the ocean below became visible. But as we moved closer, I realized it was an empty space. The clouds themselves formed a ring, a complete circle surrounding an area of clear sky. There was no storm, no wind pattern, no reason for it to exist. The pilot slowed slightly. That was the first sign that he had noticed it too. I looked toward the cockpit. He wasn't frightened, just focused. His eyes moved between the sky ahead and the instruments in front of him. Then something happened. The compass stopped, not changed direction, not moved strangely. Stopped. The needle remained fixed in place. One of the crew members noticed. "Is that normal?" The pilot didn't answer immediately. He reached toward the panel and checked another instrument, then another. All of them appeared to be working, except the compass. The helicopter continued forward. The clouds surrounded us. For several seconds, everything outside became white. Not fog, not mist, just clouds passing silently across the glass. Inside the cabin, the engine sounded exactly the same, but something about the moment felt disconnected, as if we were moving through a place that didn't belong to the sky around us. Then we emerged. The ocean returned below, but the ring remained behind us, perfect, unchanged, waiting. I looked upward through the window. That was when I saw them. At first, I thought they were reflections, small silver shapes hanging above the clouds. There were 3, maybe 4. They did not move like aircraft. No wings, no visible engines, no movement at all. They simply remained there. The sunlight reflected from their surfaces, making them difficult to look at for more than a few seconds. I turned toward the others. Nobody spoke. Everyone had seen them. I knew because nobody looked surprised. They looked confused. The kind of confusion that happens when your eyes show you something your mind has no place to store. The pilot adjusted the helicopter's path. Slowly, carefully. He never mentioned what we were seeing. Not once. After several minutes, the silver shapes disappeared behind the clouds. The compass began working again. The needle moved normally. The instruments returned to their usual readings. It was as if nothing had happened. When we landed, I expected someone to say something. A question, a joke, anything. Instead, the pilot removed his headset and stepped away. I followed him outside. The wind around the landing area carried the smell of fuel and cold air from the mountains nearby. Did you see them? I asked. He stopped walking. For a moment, I thought he might answer. Instead, he looked toward the sky. You should forget what you saw. That was all. He walked away. I never heard him mention the flight again. Neither did anyone else. Over the next few days, I searched for explanations, weather patterns, aircraft reports, anything that could make the memory feel smaller. I found nothing. No unusual cloud formations. No military exercises. No recorded objects in that area. Nothing. Months later, I finally asked another crew member about it. He looked at me quietly. Then he asked a strange question. Did they move when you looked at them? I paused. No. He nodded. That's the part one never understood. I waited for him to continue. He didn't. He simply returned to his work. Years have passed since that flight. I still remember the circle of clouds, the silent shapes above them, the way the entire helicopter seemed to become a small, fragile thing beneath an endless sky. But the detail I remember most is not what we saw. It's what we didn't hear. There was no sound from those objects. No engine. No wind. No movement. Just silence above the ocean. Sometimes when I look at the clouds on the ground, I search for that perfect circle again. Not because I want answers. I think I already understand that some things are not meant to be explained. I only look because a small part of me wonders if the circle is still there, waiting, high above the clouds, where no one thinks to look. I went back to my childhood home during a week of unexpected leave. After months offshore, the quiet streets felt almost unfamiliar. The road seemed smaller than I remembered. The trees that once looked enormous beside our house now stood lower, their branches reaching across the same old fence that had surrounded our yard for decades. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The sky was covered with soft gray clouds, and a gentle wind moved through the neighborhood. The house looked exactly as it had in my memories. The same wooden steps, the same faded paint near the front door, the same small window beside the kitchen where my mother used to place flowers. I stood there longer than I expected. Returning home after being away for so long has a strange way of making time feel confused. Everything looks familiar, yet everything feels slightly changed. Inside, the house carried the quiet smell of old books and polished wood. It reminded me of rainy afternoons when my brother and I would sit in the living room pretending to read while secretly waiting for our parents to stop asking questions. My brother always loved that room. He was the kind of person who noticed small things. A bird sitting on a fence, a crack in the sidewalk, a song playing quietly from a neighbor's window. He believed ordinary moments were usually the ones worth remembering. I thought about that as I walked through the hallway. It had been years since he passed away. I had learned how to live with the memory. Most days, it stayed where memories belong. Behind me, not gone, just quiet, The old mirror at the end of the hallway had belonged to my grandparents. Its wooden frame was darker now, and small marks covered the surface from years of being moved and cleaned. I almost walked past it. Almost. Then I stopped, because someone was standing behind me. My first thought was simple. Someone had entered the house. I turned around quickly. The hallway was empty. My heart slowed. I looked back at the mirror, and there he was, my brother, standing exactly where I'd seen the figure, behind my reflection, smiling. I couldn't move. The room remained unchanged. The old walls, the wooden floor, the soft afternoon light coming through the windows. Everything was real, except the person in the mirror. His face looked the same as the last time I remembered him. Not older, not different, just him. For several seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Then I whispered his name. The reflection did not speak. He only looked at me. There was no fear in his expression, no sadness, only a quiet kind of understanding. I stepped closer. The mirror remained cold beneath my fingertips, but the reflection stayed. My brother slowly raised one hand, not waving, pointing toward the hallway window, toward the direction of the ocean. I followed his finger. Nothing was there, only trees moving gently outside. When I looked back, the mirror showed only me. My own reflection stared back. Alone, I stayed in that hallway until the light outside faded. I told myself there had to be an explanation, a trick of reflection, a memory mixing with exhaustion, something simple, something my father would have believed. But deep down, I knew it felt different. That night, I slept in my old bedroom. The room had remained almost untouched. Books still sat on the shelf. Old drawings remained taped inside the closet. Even the small scratch on the wall from when my brother and I moved furniture was still there. I lay awake for hours, not because I was afraid, because I was thinking. Sometimes we spend years wishing for one more conversation with someone we lost. But when that impossible moment arrives, we don't know what to ask. We don't know what words are important enough. Around midnight, I heard something from the hallway, a soft creak, then another, the sound of someone walking slowly across the wooden floor. I sat up. The house was dark. I listened. One step, a pause, another step. I opened my bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The mirror waited at the end. I walked toward it carefully. My reflection appeared first, then the hallway behind me. Nothing else. I looked at the glass for a long time. No figure, no message, no impossible image, only myself. Before I turned to bed, I noticed something near the bottom of the mirror, a small mark. I had never seen it before. 3 faint lines scratched into the wooden frame, a symbol my brother and I used as children, a small drawing we made whenever we wanted to leave a secret message for each other. I touched it gently. The mark was real. The next morning, I searched the house for old photographs. I wanted to find one with the same symbol, something that could explain where it came from. I found nothing. Later that day, while standing outside near the road, I looked toward the distant coastline. The ocean was barely visible, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw a small reflection of light moving above the water, a pale glow, almost like the one I had seen offshore. I looked away. I didn't want to know if it was really there. Some memories are meant to comfort us. Others arrive with questions we are not ready to answer. And as I left my childhood home that evening, I carried one thought with me. My brother had not appeared to tell me goodbye. He had appeared to point me towards something waiting beyond the sea. The crane was the highest point on the platform. From there, you could see everything. The endless water, the distant horizon, the small lights from other vessels moving far away like tiny stars. Most workers avoided climbing that high during night shifts unless it was necessary, not because it was dangerous. The crane was inspected regularly and built to handle conditions far worse than anything we experienced. People avoided it because of the view. When you stood above everything else, the platform no longer felt like a place of work. It felt alone. I was sent up there during a maintenance check near the end of my rotation. It was a clear night, no storm, no unusual weather, the kind of night that should have felt peaceful. I climbed the ladder with a flashlight attached to my belt and a small repair kit in my hand. The metal steps were cold beneath my gloves. At each level, the noise from the main deck became quieter. The voices, the machines, the movement of people below, everything slowly disappeared. By the time I reached the operator cabin, I could barely hear anything except the wind outside. I unlocked the door. The cabin lights turned on automatically. Inside, everything looked normal. The control panels, the chair, the old coffee cup someone had forgotten near the window. I began checking the equipment. Nothing appeared damaged. No warning lights. No mechanical problems. I remember thinking the job would be finished quickly. Then I noticed the chair. The operator's chair was facing the window. Not unusual. That was where people usually sat. But someone was already there. A person, sitting completely still. My first thought was that another worker had arrived before me. I opened my mouth to speak. Then I stopped. Something felt wrong. The figure wasn't wearing a safety helmet. No reflective clothing. No equipment. Just a dark shape, sitting quietly with its back toward me. I stepped closer. "Hey!" No response. The figure did not move. I reached for the radio on my shoulder. "Is anyone else assigned to the crane tonight?" Static answered first. Then a voice. "No." The reply was immediate. "There is nobody up there." I looked back at the chair. The figure remained facing the window. My hand tightened around the flashlight. I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to step away and close the door behind me. But another part of me needed to know. I took one more step. The chair was empty. I stopped. There was no movement. No sound of someone standing. No footsteps. Nothing. The seat was simply vacant. I looked around the small cabin. There was nowhere anyone could hide. The windows were sealed. The door was behind me. The space was too small for a person to disappear. I walked toward the chair. It was warmer than the rest of the cabin. That detail stayed with me. The metal surfaces around it were cold. The controls were cold. The window glass was cold. But the chair felt as though someone had just stood up. I stepped back. At that moment, every monitor inside the cabin went dark. The lights remained on. Only the cameras failed. I checked the security display. One by one, each screen turned black. The camera outside the crane. The camera facing the lower deck. The camera pointed toward the ocean. All gone. I picked up the radio. "Control room, do you have camera issues?" Static. I tried again. Nothing. For the first time that night, I felt truly uncomfortable. Not because I saw something impossible. Because I realized something impossible had seen me. I left the cabin and began climbing down. Halfway to the next level, I stopped. A reflection appeared in the window beside me. The figure, standing inside the operator cabin. I turned around. The cabin door was closed. I could see the outline of someone behind the glass, still watching the ocean. I climbed back up. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe because I needed proof that my mind was creating things. When I opened the cabin door again, nobody was there. The chair faced the window, exactly as before. The camera screens remained dark. I stepped inside slowly. On the control panel was a small object, something I had never seen before. A piece of metal, round, smooth, covered in strange markings. I picked it up. It was colder than anything else in the room. Before I could examine it, the lights flickered. The object slipped from my hand. When the lights returned, it was gone. I searched the floor. Nothing. The cabin door opened behind me. I turned. The hallway outside was empty, but the wind had changed. The air moved upward, toward the roof, toward the sky. I looked through the window. That was when I saw the figure again. Not inside the cabin. Outside, above the crane. Impossible. It stood against the dark sky. For only a moment. No equipment. No support. No movement. Then slowly, gently it rose higher. Not falling. Not jumping. Ascending. The distance between us grew until it became only a small shape against the stars. Then it disappeared. The cameras returned at the exact same moment. Every screen lit up. Every alarm returned to normal. The control room later showed no record of the camera failure. No missing footage. No unusual readings. Nothing. When I told Harris what happened, he didn't laugh. He didn't question me. He only looked toward the highest point of the platform. You saw it too. I looked at him. What do you mean? He didn't answer. That night, before sleeping, I checked the window beside my bed. Far above the ocean, beyond the reach of the platform lights, I noticed a faint silver point moving slowly through the sky. I watched it for several seconds. Then I closed the curtain. Some things are easier to accept when you don't keep looking. The island appeared on a map before it appeared in front of us. That was the part nobody could explain. Maps are supposed to record places, not discover them. But that morning, while reviewing updated navigation charts in control room, I noticed a small landmass marked several miles from where it should have been. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, a software error, an outdated image, something simple. I checked older charts. The island existed, but not there. Its recorded position had changed, only slightly, enough to be impossible. I called over Daniel. He leaned beside me, staring at the screen. You know that's not right. I nodded. No, the island had always been listed farther west. The new data placed it closer to our current route. A small piece of land had moved across the ocean. Nobody wanted to say the obvious question. How? The supervisor contacted a nearby vessel that had passed through the area the previous week. The captain confirmed something strange. He had seen land where there should have been nothing. But when he returned to the same coordinates later that day, it was gone, like the ocean had changed its mind. 2 days later, our platform received permission to investigate. Officially, it was a navigation concern, a possible charting issue. Nobody mentioned the other possibilities. The boat reached the island just before sunset. The first thing I noticed was the shoreline. It looked old, not damaged, not abandoned. Old. The sand was dark beneath the fading light, and the trees along the edge moved gently in the evening breeze. The air carried the scent of damp earth, a smell that reminded me of forests after summer rain. It felt impossible to find something so familiar in the middle of endless water. We stepped onto the island carefully. There were no signs of recent visitors, no footprints, no broken branches, no tracks leading anywhere. Only a narrow path disappearing between the trees. The path led us toward a small village. At least, that was what it looked like. Several houses stood along the hillside. Wooden walls, small windows, simple designs. The strange part was not that the village existed. The strange part was that everything looked untouched. A door stood open. A table inside held empty dishes. A chair rested beside a window, as if someone had just stood up moments earlier. But there were no people, no voices, no movement, nothing. We entered the first house. The room smelled faintly of old paper and dried wood. A clock hung above the fireplace. The hands were frozen at 3:12. The second house had another clock, stopped at a different time. The third, another time. Every house contained one. Every clock had stopped at a different moment. It was as if time had not ended here. It had broken into pieces. Daniel found a notebook on a kitchen table. The pages were blank, except for one sentence written on the final page. The island returns when it is ready. No name, no date, nothing else. We searched the village until the light began disappearing. The others wanted to return to the boat. I agreed. There was something about the place that made staying after dark feel like a bad idea. Not because we were in danger, because the island felt like it belonged to a different moment, and we were visitors who had arrived too early. Before leaving, I looked back toward the houses. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing near the farthest window, a person, watching us. I raised my flashlight. The figure was gone. I didn't mention it. Not every strange thing needs to become a conversation. We returned to the boat and waited offshore until morning. The island remained visible all night. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it bothered me. Because if it was real, why did nobody know about it? And if it wasn't real, what exactly had we been standing on? At sunrise, we prepared to leave. The captain checked the coordinates. His expression changed. The island isn't here. We looked toward the shoreline. The land was still visible. The houses, the trees, the path. Everything remained, but the navigation system showed open water. No land, no signal, no explanation. The captain restarted the equipment. Nothing changed. Finally, he ordered the boat forward. As we moved away, I watched the island become smaller. I expected it to disappear. I expected the ocean to hide it again. Instead, something stranger happened. The island slowly moved, not because our boat was turning, not because the waves pushed us. The entire shoreline shifted across the horizon, quietly, almost gently, like a photograph being moved across a table. The houses faded first, then the trees, then the dark line of the shore. Within minutes, there was nothing left, only open water. Later, when we returned to the platform, the chart showed no island, no record, no coordinates, nothing. I kept a copy of the old map anyway. Sometimes I take it out and look at that empty space. I don't do it because I expect to find answers. I do it because I still wonder about the clocks, all those stopped moments, all those unfinished hours, and whether the island disappeared because it was never meant to be found or because it had already found us. The first signal came from beneath the ocean floor. At least, that was what the equipment told us. It began during a routine maintenance check near the end of my rotation. The platform had been operating normally for several days, and everyone seemed relieved. After months of strange events, ordinary problems almost felt comforting. A faulty valve, a damaged cable, a machine needing repair. Those were problems we understood. That morning, the maintenance team installed new monitoring equipment near the lower support area. The purpose was simple. Listen, measure, record. The ocean had always been full of sounds. Moving currents, distant vessels, natural movement beneath the surface. Nothing unusual until the first pulse appeared. The screen showed a repeating pattern, a slow vibration, a pause, then another. The technician watching the monitor called someone over. Is this supposed to be happening? Nobody answered immediately. The pattern continued, every few seconds. Steady, almost like a heartbeat. I stood behind them, watching the numbers change. My first thought was that it had to be a mechanical issue, a damaged sensor, a problem with the equipment itself. That explanation lasted until they moved the device. The signal remained. They checked another monitor. The same pattern appeared. Different equipment. Same result. The source was below us. Deep below, the supervisor asked for older records. The team searched through years of maintenance reports, looking for anything similar. Most pages showed normal readings. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remembering. Then an engineer who had been working quietly in the corner stopped turning pages. His name was Walter. He had retired years earlier, but returned occasionally as a consultant. Most people respected him because he had spent decades working offshore and seemed to know every sound a platform could make. He stared at the screen. Then he slowly closed the folder in his hands. I've heard this before. Everyone looked at him when he didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the windows, toward the ocean. Long time ago. The room became quiet. I watched his expression. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Recognition. Like someone finding an old photograph they hoped had been lost. Later that evening, I found Walter alone near the observation deck. The sun was disappearing, painting the water with soft orange light. I asked him about the signal. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he leaned against the railing. When I was younger, I worked on another platform. I listened. We recorded the same pattern. What happened? He looked down at the ocean. The equipment stopped. Because it broke? I thought about the platform. The endless darkness beyond the lights. The moments when everything seemed too quiet. I nodded. Walter looked back toward the water. It isn't always empty. That night, the signal returned. Stronger. The control room filled with people watching the monitors. Nobody spoke. The pattern continued. Slow, even, almost peaceful. Then someone noticed something. Whenever a person spoke near the equipment, the signal changed. The pulse weakened. The moment the room became quiet again, it returned. We tested it. A technician talked. The signal faded. He stopped. It returned. Another person laughed. The pattern disappeared. Silence. It came back. Nobody suggested what that meant. Nobody wanted to. The next test was done with recorded voices. The same result. Human voices affected it, but only while they were being heard. As if whatever was beneath the ocean wasn't reacting to sound. As if it was reacting to us. That thought stayed with me. I didn't mention it to anyone. Some ideas become more frightening when spoken aloud. The following morning, the equipment recorded something different. The pulse had changed. Instead of one pattern, there were now two. A response. The first signal continued. Then another appeared several seconds later, like an answer coming from somewhere farther away. The entire maintenance room went quiet. The technicians looked at each other. Nobody touched the controls. Nobody moved. Even Walter, who had seen something similar years before, looked uncertain. The second signal lasted only 3 minutes. Then both stopped. Completely. No warning. No fading. Just silence. For the rest of the day, the ocean remained unusually calm. No waves against the platform. No movement on the surface. No distant ships. Nothing. That evening, I stood alone outside near the lower deck. The sunset reflected across the water. It was beautiful. Almost too beautiful. I thought about all the strange things I had seen since arriving offshore. The lights, the voices, the impossible places. I used to believe fear came from seeing something terrifying. I no longer believe that. Sometimes fear comes from seeing something peaceful and realizing you have no idea what it is. Before leaving the deck, I glanced at the monitoring screen to the nearby window. The equipment was still turned on. The signal had stopped hours earlier. The numbers remained flat, normal. Then, just as I reached the door, one small line appeared on the display. A single pulse, followed by another, and then nothing. No explanation, no warning, only the quiet certainty that whatever was beneath us had not disappeared. It had only stopped answering. The first thing I noticed was the empty horizon. At first, I thought it was a temporary thing, a quiet week, a slow period. Offshore work had always been unpredictable. Some days, ships passed by constantly. Other days, the ocean seemed completely untouched by human life. But this was different. Weeks passed. No cargo vessels. No fishing boats. No helicopters crossing the sky. Nothing. The platform continued operating normally, yet the world beyond it felt like it had slowly disappeared. It began after the signal from beneath the seabed stopped. Nobody mentioned that connection. Nobody wanted to. The maintenance equipment was removed. The reports were filed, and everyone returned to their duties. That was how people survived offshore. You kept moving. You followed schedules. You focused on the next task instead of the strange thing that happened yesterday. But the quiet remained. Every morning, I walked to the observation deck with my coffee and looked toward the horizon. Every morning, there was nothing, just water, endless water. The weather was perfect. That made it worse. Bad weather would have explained the absence. Storms, heavy waves, poor visibility. But the skies stayed clear. The ocean stayed calm. There was no reason for the world to feel empty. The communication systems began failing one by one. The first was the satellite phone. It worked perfectly during testing. Then, during an important call, the signal disappeared. No warning, no error message, just silence. The technicians checked everything. The equipment was fine. The connection was not. A few days later, the backup system failed too. People tried not to worry. They joked about old technology. They blamed weather patterns. They blamed the location. Anything that made it feel normal. I wanted to believe them. I really did. But I had learned something after months offshore. Normal explanations usually arrived quickly. The strange ones waited. One afternoon, I was walking to the storage area when I smelled something impossible. Pine. Fresh pine. The scent was strong enough that I stopped moving. For a moment, I was no longer on a platform surrounded by ocean. I was back near the forest behind my childhood home. My father used to take me there every autumn. We would walk between the trees, collecting fallen branches for fireplace. He always said the woods had their own language. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. I stood there for several seconds, letting the memory return. Then I remembered where I was. Hundreds of miles from any forest. There were no trees, no wood, no reason for that smell to exist. I checked the storage room. Nothing. Only metal shelves and sealed containers. I told nobody. Not because I thought they would laugh. Because I wasn't sure I wanted anyone else to experience it. Days became difficult to measure. Without regular communication, time felt less reliable. The sunrise came earlier than expected. Or maybe we slept longer than usual. The clock said one thing. Our bodies felt another. Eventually, someone noticed the problem. The platform calendar was no longer matching the recorded sunrise times. The difference was small, only minutes at first, then longer. Nobody had an answer. The supervisor ordered equipment checks. Everything was functioning. Every instrument reported normal conditions. The only thing that changed was our understanding of time. One evening, I sat in the mess hall with 3 other workers. Nobody talked much anymore. Not because we were afraid, because there was nothing new to say. The same questions existed every day. Where were the ships? Why were the signals failing? How far away was the rest of the world? A cup sat untouched on the table between us. The coffee inside had gone cold. Nobody noticed. Outside the window, the ocean reflected the last light of the day. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. That was the strangest part. Nothing around us appeared dangerous. There was no storm approaching, no warning from the equipment, no obvious threat, just absence. One morning, I woke before everyone else. I walked outside while the platform was still quiet. The sky was pale. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction. I looked through the binoculars. Nothing. I scanned slowly. Still nothing. Then, for a brief moment, I thought I saw something. A dark shape far away. A ship. I raised the binoculars higher. My heart lifted. Finally, something. Someone. But the shape disappeared before I could focus. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing returned. Maybe it was a wave. Maybe a shadow. Maybe my mind creating something, because it needed to see another person. I lowered the binoculars. The silence around me felt different then. Not empty. Aware. I stayed there until the sun fully rose. Behind me, the platform began waking. Doors opened. Machines started. People moved through the corridors. Life continued. But beyond the railing, the ocean remained untouched. No ships. No signals. No proof that anyone else was out there. Only the endless horizon. And the strange feeling that somewhere beyond it, something had decided we were better left alone. The first time I saw the lights on Platform 7, I thought they were a mistake. That was the easiest explanation. A technical error, a forgotten system, a timer that had not been switched off. Anything ordinary, because Platform 7 had been abandoned for years. Everyone knew that. It appeared on old maps. It appeared in old maintenance records. But nobody worked there anymore. The structure had been closed after a major equipment failure, and the company had removed the remaining crew long before I arrived offshore. It was supposed to be empty. Completely empty. I noticed the lights during my evening inspection. The sun had already disappeared, leaving the ocean dark beneath a quiet sky. I was standing near the eastern observation area when a faint glow caught my attention. Across the water, on the abandoned platform, a row of lights, one by one, turning on. I stared for several seconds. My first thought was that someone had returned. Maybe a repair team. Maybe an inspection crew. I picked up my radio. Control, are there any scheduled visits to Platform 7? The answer came quickly. No. I waited. Are you sure? A pause. Then, nobody has permission to be there. I looked back. The lights remained. Then I saw her. A person standing near the railing. A woman. She was too far away for me to see her face clearly, but her shape was unmistakable. She stood completely still, looking toward our platform. I raised my hand without thinking. A small wave. The woman lifted her arm and waved back. I lowered my hand. A strange feeling moved through me. Not fear, not exactly. More like the feeling of seeing someone you recognize in a place where they should not exist. I called again. Do we have visual confirmation from anyone else? Nobody answered immediately. Then another voice came through the radio. No, only one word. No explanation. No question. I looked around the observation deck. Several workers were nearby. I called them over. Can you see Platform 7? They looked toward the horizon. A few seconds passed. One of them shook his head. No. I turned back. The woman was gone. The lights remained. That was the part one couldn't understand. If it had been a reflection, a mistake, a trick of distance. Why were the lights still there? The next morning, I searched through old records. Platform 7 had been closed for 14 years. The photographs showed the same structure, the same shape, the same position. But the records included something unusual, a final maintenance report. The last person assigned to platform had been a woman. Her name was removed from the copy I found. Only the date remained. 14 years earlier. I told myself that meant nothing. Names disappear from records. Paperwork gets lost. Old files become incomplete. There were explanations. There were always explanations. That evening, I watched again. Same time, same place. The lights returned, and so did the woman. This time, she stood closer to the edge. I used binoculars. The image became clearer. She was wearing old-style offshore clothing, the kind workers wore years ago. Her jacket looked faded. Her hair moved slightly in the wind. But the strangest thing was not her appearance. It was the way she looked at me. Not like she was seeing a stranger, like she had been waiting. I lowered the binoculars. When I looked again, she was gone. The following day, I asked one of the older workers about the platform, a man named Harris. He had been offshore longer than anyone else. When I mentioned the woman, his expression changed. He didn't ask what she looked like. He didn't ask when I saw her. He only asked one question. Did she say anything? I shook my head. No. He looked relieved. That surprised me. Why? He looked away. Because she did before. I waited, but he never explained. Some memories are locked away for a reason. 3 nights later, I saw her again. The same lights, the same position, the same quiet wave. But this time, she did something different. She placed one hand against the railing. Then she moved her lips. No sound reached me. The distance was too great. But I understood the words anyway. Not because I heard them. Because somehow I knew she was saying, "Don't come here." I stepped back from the window. My heart raced. The warning made no sense. I wasn't planning to visit. Nobody was. The platform was abandoned. The next morning, I checked the cameras facing Platform 7. The footage showed nothing unusual. No lights, no person, only empty metal and ocean. But one detail bothered me. At the exact time I had seen her standing there, the camera recorded movement, not on the platform. Above it, a small figure appearing for 3 seconds, then disappearing. I never showed anyone the recording. I don't know why. Maybe because some things become more real when they are shared. Years later, I still think about that woman. I think about the way she waved, the way she looked at me, the way she warned me without making a sound. Sometimes, I wonder if she was trying to protect me, or if she was warning me because she already knew what would happen. The last time I saw Platform 7, the lights came on as usual, but the woman was not standing at the railing. She was standing farther back, near the doorway, and before the lights disappeared, she slowly raised her hand, not to wave, to say goodbye. The staircase appeared during the lowest tide I had ever seen. For years, I had worked offshore and watched the ocean change its shape every day. The water could rise. The water could disappear. The coastline could look completely different depending on the weather and the season. But I had never seen anything like this. A path beneath the sea. A place that looked as though it had been hidden there for a very long time. It happened during a supply inspection near a small island that appeared on old navigation records. The same kind of island that seemed to exist only when it wanted to be found. The crew had anchored nearby while checking equipment. The tide was unusually low, lower than anyone expected. The exposed shoreline stretched farther than the map suggested. I walked along the edge with a small group from the maintenance team. The ground was strange, not muddy, not covered in sea life, just open, quiet. Then one of the workers stopped. "Do you see that?" I followed his gaze. At first, I thought it was part of the rocks. A straight line, a shape that didn't belong. Then the water moved away slightly, and I saw them. Steps, a staircase descending from the shore into the dark water. I stood there without speaking. The stairs were made from stone, smooth, old, yet they looked untouched by years beneath the sea. The strange thing was not that they existed. The strange thing was that they were dry, completely dry. The ocean surrounded them. Waves moved around the edges. But the steps themselves held no water, no seaweed, no signs of the place where they were. One of the workers refused to go closer. I understood why. Some discoveries create curiosity. Others create a feeling that you are standing somewhere you were never meant to reach. I walked toward the staircase, not because I was brave, because I had spent too long searching for answers. The first step felt normal beneath my boots. The second step did too. The water remained below me. The ocean stretched around the island. Everything seemed ordinary. Then I noticed something strange. A memory disappeared. Not completely. Not like forgetting a name. More like a page being removed from a book. I stopped. I knew something was missing, but I couldn't identify what. I climbed another step. Another memory faded. This time, I noticed. I couldn't remember the street where I grew up. I knew I had lived somewhere. I knew I had a childhood, but the image was gone. I turned back toward the shore. My crew stood there watching. Their faces looked familiar, but for a moment, I couldn't remember all their names. I stepped away from the staircase. The memory returned. The street, the names, the small details. Everything came rushing back. I stared at the steps, understanding something I didn't want to understand. The staircase wasn't taking my memories. It was keeping them. I should have walked away. Anyone would have. But curiosity has always been stronger than fear for me. My father used to say that curiosity was a useful tool. But like any tool, you had to know when to put it down. I wish I had listened better. I stepped onto the stairs again. This time, I went farther. The ocean around me became quieter. The island behind me felt distant. I thought about my childhood home, the sound of my mother's voice, the smell of my father's workshop, the first boat I ever repaired, the people I had loved. Each step removed something small, a song, a conversation, a face. I tried holding on to the memories, but they slipped away before I could reach them. At one point, I stopped because I realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember why I had come there. I looked back. The crew was still on the shore, but they seemed like strangers. I knew I should return. I knew I was supposed to, but the reason felt far away. Then I saw something at the bottom of the stairs. A reflection, not my own, a younger version of myself, standing somewhere I didn't recognize, watching, waiting. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, it was gone. I climbed back. Each step returned something. Slowly. The street, the names, the memories. The pieces of myself came back one by one. When my boots touched the shore again, I fell to my knees. The crew rushed toward me. They were talking, asking questions, but I barely heard them. I was too busy remembering. I was too busy making sure I was still myself. The tide began returning before sunset. The water moved across the exposed ground. The staircase disappeared beneath the waves. Not covered, not damaged, simply gone. The next morning, we returned to the same location. There was no sign of it, no stone, no path, no evidence, only ocean. I later searched through every chart and record available. Nothing, no mention of a staircase, no history, no explanation. But sometimes when I forget small things, I wonder, was it normal? Was it just age? Or did I leave something behind on those steps that I never recovered? I don't know. And maybe that is the part that troubles me most. because every now and then I wake from a dream with a memory of a place I have never seen, a staircase beneath the sea, waiting quietly for someone else to remember it. The last normal weather report I ever heard was on a Tuesday morning. I remember that because it was the last day when the world outside the platform still followed rules. I understood. The sky was clear. The ocean was calm. The forecast predicted ordinary conditions. Wind from the east. Light clouds. A small chance of rain. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remembering. At the time, I didn't know I would miss a simple weather report. I didn't know I would one day wish for storms, for thunder, for anything that made sense. The first strange forecast came 3 days later. The radio operator sounded tired. Not nervous, not confused, just tired, like someone who had repeated the impossible too many times. The message was short. Expect silent lightning over the northern waters. Nobody paid attention at first. Silent lightning sounded like a mistake, a wrong word, a poor signal, something caused by interference. Then it happened. That night, the sky flashed, bright white, over and over, but there was no thunder. No sound followed. The ocean remained completely quiet beneath the lights. Everyone on the platform watched from the windows. Nobody spoke. We had seen strange things before, but this was different. The sky was doing something impossible while looking completely peaceful. The next morning, the weather report predicted frozen rain. The temperature was warm. The forecast made no sense. We laughed about it. A few hours later, small drops began falling from the sky. They froze before touching the ground. Tiny pieces of ice covered the deck. Not snow, not hail, something between the two. The radio operator said nothing after that. He didn't need to. We had already understood. The predictions were coming true. Every single one. At first, people tried to find patterns. They searched old weather data. They checked satellite images. They contacted anyone still reachable. Nobody had answers. The weather reports continued, and they became stranger. A morning of sunlight with no warmth. A night where the wind stopped completely. A storm that appeared on radar but never arrived. Conditions that sounded impossible became ordinary. The hardest part was not the weather. It was how quickly we adapted. Humans are good at accepting things they should question. After enough time, impossible becomes routine. We stopped asking why. We started preparing. The platform changed. People spoke less. Meals became quieter. Everyone listened to the daily forecast with the same attention people once gave emergency warnings. One evening, I sat alone in the control room, listening to the radio. The announcer gave the next report. His voice was weaker than before. Tomorrow will bring a clear sky. A pause, longer than normal. Then, visibility will remain perfect. I waited. Something about his silence bothered me. It sounded like he was choosing his next words carefully. However, the radio crackled. Do not expect to see anything beyond it. The message ended. I stared at the speaker. For several seconds, I didn't move. The next morning, the sky was exactly as predicted. Perfectly clear. No clouds. No rain. No wind. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath it, but the horizon looked wrong. Not covered. Not hidden. Just empty. The line between water and sky seemed to disappear. It felt like the world had forgotten where one ended and the other began. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody needed to. We all saw it. Days passed. The weather reports continued. But something changed. The announcer no longer sounded surprised. Neither did we. A forecast for strange conditions became normal. A warning became a schedule. A mystery became part of daily life. I began writing down every report in a small notebook. Not because I thought I would solve anything. Because I wanted proof that the old world had existed. The world with normal rain. Normal storms. Normal mornings. The world where weather was something you checked, not something you feared. One night, I opened a notebook and read the earliest entries. The first pages contained ordinary forecasts. Simple words. Clear skies. Light winds. Small chances of rain. I almost laughed. Those notes looked like they belonged to another person. Another lifetime. The final entry I wrote was different. There was no weather description, no temperature, no prediction, only one sentence. The sky is still there. I am just no longer sure it belongs to us. I closed the notebook. Outside, the ocean remained perfectly still. The next report came at midnight. The announcer spoke softly, almost like he was speaking only to me. Tomorrow will bring the same conditions. A pause. Then, there is nothing left to prepare for. The radio went silent. I sat there for a long time, waiting for another message, another warning, another impossible forecast. Nothing came, and for the first time in months, I realized something strange. I was no longer afraid of what the weather would bring. I was afraid that one day there would be no weather at all. The harbor was supposed to be our return to normal life. After weeks offshore, after losing communication with the outside world, after watching the ocean become emptier with each passing day, the sight of land should have brought relief. It did, for a few minutes. I remember standing near the front of the evacuation vessel as the shoreline grew closer. A town appeared in the distance. Buildings, roads, streetlights. Everything looked exactly the way it should. The kind of ordinary scene I had been waiting for. A place with people, a place with voices, a place that proved the world had continued without us. Nobody spoke much during the final approach. We were too tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. When you spend enough time surrounded by unanswered questions, silence becomes easier than conversation. The boat reached the harbor just after sunrise. The water was calm. The docks were empty. That was the first thing I noticed. No workers. No fishermen. No vehicles waiting. Nothing. I told myself it was early. The town was probably still waking up. That explanation lasted until we stepped onto the street. The cars were there. Hundreds of them, parked along roads, outside houses, near shops, exactly where people had left them. But nobody was inside. A delivery truck stood near a corner store. The driver's door was open. A bag of groceries rested on the seat, as if someone had stepped away for only a moment. The town looked paused, not abandoned, paused. We walked through the streets, calling out. No answers, no footsteps, no movement behind windows. The houses were unlocked. Inside, everything seemed normal. A family dinner sat on a kitchen table. Plates, glasses, silverware, food that had long gone cold. A television played quietly in one living room. A weather report repeated on the screen. The announcer spoke about conditions that no longer existed. Clear skies, normal temperatures, a future that belonged to another world. I turned it off. The silence afterward felt heavier. We searched for signs of what happened. A note, a warning, anything. There was nothing. No emergency messages. No signs of panic. No evidence of people leaving. It was as if every person in the town had simply stood up and walked away at the same moment. The strangest detail was the smell. Fresh bread. It drifted through the streets. Warm, comforting, impossible. A bakery near the center of town had its doors open. Inside, everything was clean. A tray sat on the counter. Freshly baked bread rested there, still untouched. I stood in the doorway for a long time. It reminded me of mornings at home. My mother preparing breakfast before school. My father reading the newspaper. Small moments I never thought I would miss. The memory made the empty streets feel even colder. That evening, we gathered supplies from nearby stores. Nobody wanted to stay outside after dark. The town felt different at night. During the day, it looked empty. At night, it felt like something was missing. Not something we could see. Something we could sense. I walked alone near the harbor before sleeping. The boats remained tied to the docks. The lights from the houses still worked. The streets still looked alive. Only the people were gone. I looked toward the water. For the first time in weeks, I saw another ship, far away, a small shape on the horizon. I raised my hand. I waited. The ship did not change direction. It moved slowly across the water, then disappeared. I don't know why that bothered me. Maybe because I had spent so long waiting to see someone else. And when something finally appeared, It didn't come closer. The next morning, we continued searching. We entered more homes, more buildings, more empty rooms. In one house, I found a family photograph on the wall. A normal picture. Parents, children, a summer afternoon. Nothing unusual, except one thing. The ocean behind them. In the background of the photograph, far beyond the family, was a pale blue light above the water. The same kind of light I had seen years earlier offshore. The same light that never reflected on the waves, only in the windows. I touched the photograph carefully. A strange feeling passed through me. Not fear, recognition. As if all these events had been pieces of one thing I had not yet understood. That evening, we made plans to leave the town. Nobody wanted to stay. Not because it was dangerous, because it was too quiet. Before leaving, I stood once more in the empty harbor. The streets behind me remained untouched. The houses waited. The bread was still there. The cars were still parked. Everything remained exactly as we found it, except the world felt smaller. I looked across the water. The horizon was empty. No ships, no lights, no signs of anyone. Only endless ocean. I used to believe isolation meant being far away from people. I was wrong. True isolation was standing in the middle of a place built for thousands and realizing you might be the only person left who remembers they were ever there. That night, as we prepared to depart, every light in the harbor turned off at the same time, not one after another, all together. The streets disappeared into darkness. The houses became silent shapes, and somewhere in the distance, a single door closed. The first time a rain moved upward, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. After everything I had witnessed, I had learned not to trust the first explanation that entered my mind. A strange light, a missing ship, a voice from nowhere, a place that appeared and disappeared. The world had already shown me that it did not always follow the rules I understood. Still, watching rain rise into the sky felt impossible. It happened after we left the empty harbor, after the streets without people, after the houses where meals remained untouched and clocks continued moving without anyone watching them. We traveled for several days with no clear destination. There was nowhere left to return to. The old routes felt meaningless. The maps showed places that no longer felt connected to reality. So we followed the ocean. That was all we could do. The morning began quietly. The sea was smooth. The sky was pale. There was no storm, no wind, no warning. Then the first drops appeared, small white drops falling from above. I lifted my hand expecting water. Instead, the drop moved upward, away from my palm, toward the sky. I watched another, then another. Soon the entire ocean around us filled with tiny streams of white rain traveling upward. Nobody spoke. We had run out of words for impossible things. The rain did not feel cold. It did not feel frightening. It felt strangely peaceful, like watching something ancient happen without needing to understand it. As the white rain continued, shapes appeared in the distance. At first, I thought they were people standing on the shoreline of a nearby island, but there was no island there, only water. The figures stood far away, tall, still, watching. Their bodies reflected the soft light around them, making them appear almost bright against the gray horizon. Nobody moved toward us. Nobody called out. They simply remained there, observing. I remembered all the fear I had carried, all the nights staring into darkness, all the questions that had followed me from one strange event to another. But looking at those figures, something inside me changed. I wasn't calm because I understood. I was calm because I finally accepted that I didn't. For so long, I had searched for explanations. I wanted every mystery to have a name, every impossible thing to have a reason. But some things existed beyond the limits of what we expected. The figures slowly turned, not away from us, toward the sky. The white rain continued rising around them. Then one of them lifted a hand. Not a warning, not a signal, a simple gesture, almost like a greeting. I raised my own hand. For a moment, I felt like a child again. The same feeling I had when my father showed me the night sky and told me there were things in the universe we might never understand. You don't have to know everything to know something is beautiful. I never forgot those words. Years later, standing in the middle of an impossible ocean, I finally understood them. The figures remained until the sunlight changed. Then they slowly faded, not disappearing, more like becoming part of the light around them. The rain stopped rising. The ocean returned to normal. The world became quiet again. But something was different. The fear was gone. Not because the unknown had become less mysterious, because I had stopped fighting it. That evening, I sat alone near the edge of the deck. The water reflected the stars above. For the first time in a long while, I didn't search the horizon for answers. I simply looked. The strange events that once felt like warnings now felt like pieces of a much larger picture. A picture I could only see one small corner of. Later that night, I noticed something near the railing. A small mark. A symbol I had seen before. On the island. On the old metal object from the crane. On the notes connected to my father's compass. I touched it gently. The surface was smooth. Warm. Almost familiar. I expected fear. Instead, I felt a strange comfort. Like finding a message from someone who had been trying to reach me for years. The next morning, the horizon remained empty. No ships. No buildings. No signs of the world I once knew. But I no longer felt lost. Because somewhere beyond what I could see, something had been watching. Not waiting to harm me. Not waiting to take anything away. Simply waiting for me to understand. And for the first time since everything began, I was no longer afraid of being found. I found my father's compass inside an abandoned truck. That was the part one never understood. Not the compass itself. Not the strange direction it pointed. The impossible part was how it ended up there. The truck was sitting alone beside an empty road near the coastline. The town around it had been silent for weeks, and most vehicles had been left exactly where their owners abandoned them. This one was different. It looked old, older than the others. The paint had faded, and the windows were covered with dust. I almost walked past it. Then I noticed something hanging from the rear view mirror. A small metal chain. I knew that chain. I knew it before I even touched it. My father's compass. I stood there for several seconds, unable to move. My father had carried that compass for most of his life. He kept it in his pocket during every trip, every hike, every repair job. When I was young, I used to ask why he carried something so old when newer devices could do the same thing. He always smiled. Some things are worth keeping because they remind you where you came from. After he passed away, the compass disappeared. I searched everywhere. The house, the garage, old boxes, nothing. I accepted that it was gone. Until that moment, inside an abandoned truck, near a place I had never visited before. I picked it up carefully. The metal was warm, almost as if someone had been holding it moments earlier. I opened the cover. The needle moved. At first, I expected it to point north. It didn't. It turned slowly, then stopped toward the sky. I stared at it, a compass pointing upward. It made no sense. I turned it in my hand. The needle followed, always pointing above me. I looked around. Only the empty road. Only the quiet coastline. Only the endless sky. I placed the compass in my pocket and returned to the temporary shelter where we had been staying. That evening, I found something else. A small folded piece of paper tucked inside the compass cover. My father's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The shape of his letters. The way he pressed harder on certain words. My hand shook as I opened it. The note was not long. Only a few sentences. Most of it made no sense at first. He wrote about lights. About the ocean. About places that appeared when they were ready. Things I'd spent years trying to understand. At the bottom of the page was one sentence. The direction is not always where you need to go. Sometimes it is where you need to look. I read it again. Then again. My father had seen these things. Not exactly the same events, but something similar. I thought about all the stories I had ignored when I was younger. The strange things he mentioned. The nights he stayed outside looking at the stars. The way he always became quiet whenever the ocean was mentioned. I used to think he was simply lost in memories. Now, I wondered if he had been remembering something real. That night, I searched through old belongings we had recovered from the empty town. I found a small notebook inside a storage box. My father's old journal. Most entries were ordinary. Work, weather, family, simple things. Then, near the final pages, everything changed. The writing became shorter, more careful. He described seeing lights over the ocean. He described hearing voices through broken radios. He described a place where time did not move normally. The same things I had experienced. The same impossible moments. The final entry had no date, only a single line. If you find this, then it means a path reached you too. I closed the notebook. For a long time, I sat quietly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was just overwhelmed by the thought that my father had carried this knowledge alone. All those years, all those questions, and I had never asked. The next morning, I took the compass outside. The sky was clear. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead. The needle immediately moved upward. I looked where it pointed. At first, I saw nothing. Then the light appeared. A faint glow above the horizon. The same pale blue light from my first night offshore. The same light that never touched the waves. Only the windows. I stood there watching. For once, I did not feel the need to run. I did not need an explanation. I simply understood that the things following me were not new. They were older than me, older than my father, maybe older than anyone who had ever looked toward the sky and wondered if something was looking back. I held the compass in my hand. The needle remained steady, pointing upward, not north, not south, not toward a place on any map, towards something beyond all of them. That evening, before the light disappeared, I noticed a small detail engraved on the back of the compass, something I had never seen before. 3 words, words written in my father's handwriting. You were ready. I traced the letters with my thumb. Then I looked toward the sky, and for the first time, I wondered if my father had not left me a compass to find my way home. Maybe he had left it so I could find my way forward. I found the house beneath the waves on a morning when the ocean looked completely ordinary. That was the strangest part. After everything I had witnessed, I expected something impossible to announce itself. A strange light, a warning, a sound from somewhere it should not exist. But that morning, the sea was calm. The sky was clear. The horizon looked exactly like it had for thousands of years. Nothing suggested that something forgotten was waiting below. We discovered it while following the direction of my father's compass. I had stopped questioning the compass by then, not because I understood it, because it had been right too many times. The needle moved slowly toward a location far from any known route. There was no island, no structure, no signal, only open water. The crew wanted to turn back. I understood why. Every strange place we had found had left us with more questions than answers. But something inside me knew this was different. The compass was not leading us toward danger. It was leading us toward a memory. We lowered the equipment into the water just before sunset. The first images appeared minutes later. At first, I thought the camera had malfunctioned. The screen showed a shape beneath the ocean floor. Straight lines, corners, a roof, a window, a house. A perfectly preserved house resting deep beneath the waves. Nobody spoke. The room became completely quiet. A house should not exist there. Not like that. Not untouched. Not waiting. We prepared a small dive team. I volunteered. Maybe because I needed to see it myself. Maybe because some part of me already felt connected to that place. The descent was peaceful. The water around us was clear. Light from above faded slowly until everything became darker. Then the house appeared. It looked exactly like a normal family home. Wooden walls, a small front porch, a garden area covered in sand. Except it was sitting on the ocean floor. I moved closer. The strange thing was not the water around it. The strange thing was the absence of damage. There were no broken windows, no collapsed walls, no signs that the ocean had ever touched it. It looked like someone had simply placed it there. I reached the front door. It was slightly open. Inside, the rooms remained untouched. A table stood in the kitchen, for chairs surrounded it. A small lamp rested near the wall. Books remained on shelves. Photographs set inside frames. It felt less like exploring a forgotten place, and more like entering someone's home while they were away. I moved through the hallway slowly. The walls were covered with drawings, children's drawings, colorful shapes, families, animals, a picture of the ocean. I stopped at one drawing. It showed a house beneath waves. Above it, there was a bright blue circle in the sky, the same color as the lights I had seen so many times. My breathing became slower. The child who drew this had known. Somehow, long before me, I moved into the next room. A bedroom, small, simple, a wooden bed, a shelf filled with old toys. Everything remained exactly where it had been left. Then I noticed a window facing the ocean outside. Impossible. The glass was clear. No pressure, no cracks, no water entering. I reached toward it. Before my hand touched the glass, the window opened. Slowly, quietly. Water did not rush inside. Nothing changed. The room remained dry. The ocean outside remained calm. I looked through the opening. Beyond the window was not darkness. There was light, a soft blue glow in the distance. The same light that had followed me for years. I wanted to move closer. I wanted to understand. But instead, I stayed where I was. For the first time, I wasn't searching for an answer. I was simply witnessing something beautiful. When I returned to the surface, I carried no objects, no evidence, nothing anyone could study, only the memory. Later, when we checked the recording, the footage was different. The camera showed the house, the rooms, the drawings, everything we had seen. But one detail had changed. In the family photograph on the wall, there was someone standing in the background, a person looking toward the camera. I paused the image. The face was unclear, but the clothing was familiar. An old jacket, a simple watch, a compass hanging near the pocket. My father. I stared at the screen. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a reflection, a distortion caused by the water. But deep inside, I knew better. My father had not just known about these places. He had been connected to them. Maybe he had found the house years before me. Maybe he had stood in that same room. Maybe he had looked through that impossible window and wondered the same things I wondered now. That night, I sat alone beside the water. The ocean was quiet beneath the stars. For once, the silence did not feel empty. It felt peaceful. I looked at my father's compass. The needle was no longer pointing toward the sky. It had stopped. For the first time since I found it, it pointed home. For years, I believed the lights were following me. I was wrong. They were waiting for me to understand. That was the truth. I finally accepted on the night the figures revealed themselves. The same pale lights that had appeared beyond the offshore platform. The same glow that had followed the strange places connected to the ocean. The same quiet presence that had appeared in the sky, beneath the waves and beyond the horizon. They were never chasing me. They were never trying to scare me. They were simply there, waiting. I reached that realization after returning to platform where everything had started. The place where I first saw the blue light beyond the helipad. The place where the questions began. The structure looked smaller than I remembered. Years change the way we see things. Places that once felt enormous become familiar. But the ocean remained the same. Endless. Quiet. Watching. I arrived alone. No crew. No equipment. No reason anyone else would understand why I needed to return. I carried only my father's compass. The same compass that had guided me through every impossible discovery. That evening, the sky turned dark without a single cloud. The water reflected the first stars. Then the light appeared. Not in the distance this time. Closer. Much closer. A soft blue glow formed above the ocean. I stood still, waiting for fear to return. It didn't. The feeling that came over me was something I had not experienced in years. Peace. The light moved slowly. Not like a machine. Not like an object. More like a thought becoming visible. Then the figures appeared. They stood near the edge of the platform. Quiet. Still. The same figures I had seen during the white rain. The same presence that had appeared in different forms throughout my journey. But now I could see them clearly. They were not monsters. They were not something to escape. They looked almost familiar. That was the part one struggled with most. Their faces were not strange. They carried expressions I recognized, memories, emotions, small details that belonged to people I had known. I saw a face that reminded me of an old friend from my first offshore job, another that reminded me of a worker who disappeared years earlier. Then I saw someone who made me forget how to breathe. My father, not exactly as I remembered him, not younger, not older, just peaceful, standing there, looking at me. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask every question I had carried for so long. Why the lights? Why the messages? Why me? But no words came. My father only smiled. The same quiet smile he had whenever I asked questions he knew I wasn't ready to answer. The compass in my hand became warm. I looked down. The needle moved, not toward the sky, not toward the ocean, toward him. Then the light around him changed. The figures were not separate anymore. They were connected, like different pieces of one enormous memory, a presence that had existed long before I noticed it. I finally understood something. The strange events were never random. The abandoned boat, the impossible island, the voices, the hidden places, they were not warnings. They were invitations. Small doors placed in my path, waiting for me to open them when I was ready. I thought about all the nights I had been afraid, all the moments I wanted answers, all the times I wished the impossible would stop. Now I wished I had understood sooner. The unknown was never empty. It was simply larger than me. My father looked toward the horizon. I followed his gaze. Far away, more lights appeared. Hundreds, maybe thousands, across the ocean, above the water, beyond the sky. They were everywhere, quietly observing, not invading, not arriving, just existing. For the first time, I didn't feel like a visitor. I felt like I had finally arrived somewhere I had been searching for my entire life. The figures began to fade, not disappearing, returning, like waves becoming part of the sea again. Before my father vanished, he looked back at me one last time. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt gratitude. Some goodbyes are painful because they are endings. Others are peaceful because they mean something was never truly lost. The platform became quiet again. The ocean remained dark. The lights were gone, but I was not alone anymore. I sat there until morning, holding the compass in my hand, thinking about everything I had seen, thinking about everything I still didn't understand. And strangely, I was okay with that, because some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some are meant to change the person who discovers them. When the first light of morning touched the horizon, I looked toward the ocean one final time. The blue glow appeared for only a second, a quiet reminder, a message without words. I smiled, because I finally understood what the lights had been saying all along. They were never asking me to follow them. They were waiting for me to remember where I belonged. I returned to the platform where everything began, not because I expected answers, not because I believed there was anything left to discover. I returned because some places stay with you. Some places become part of your memory in a way you cannot explain. The old platform stood above the ocean, just as it had years before. The same metal structure, the same open horizon, the same endless water stretching in every direction. But everything felt different. I felt different. When I first arrived there, I was searching for normal things. A safe job, a quiet life, a future that made sense. I never imagined that a simple night shift would lead me toward places that existed between memory and reality. I never imagined the ocean would show me things I had no words for. The pale blue light, the empty boats, the voices, the impossible islands, the places where time seemed to forget itself. For years, I had tried to connect every piece. I kept records. I searched old reports. I studied maps. I looked for explanations. But standing there again, I finally understood something. The answers were never hidden. I was the one who had not been ready to see them. The sea was perfectly smooth that night. No waves, no wind, no movement. It looked less like water and more like a mirror. I stood near the edge of the platform, holding my father's compass, the same compass that had guided me through every impossible moment. The needle no longer moved. It simply rested, quiet, peaceful, For the first time, I didn't wonder where it would lead me. I didn't need it to. I already knew. The sky above me was clear. Too clear. There were no clouds. No stars at first. Only darkness. Then the lights appeared. Not one. Not two. Thousands. Across the horizon. Above the water. Between the stars. They appeared exactly as they always had. Quietly. Without warning. But this time, I did not step back. I did not reach for the radio. I did not search for someone else to confirm what I was seeing. I simply watched. And I remembered. Every strange moment had been a piece of the same story. The light beyond the helipad. The boat drifting empty through the ocean. The voice inside the lifeboat repeating my father's words. The diner that existed for only a short time. The lighthouse with no keeper. The signals beneath the sea. The empty harbor. The house below the waves. Everything was connected, not by fear, by memory, by something much older than any person could understand. I thought about my father, about the things he knew but never explained. Maybe he had tried. Maybe I simply wasn't ready to listen. Some people spend their entire lives searching for proof that they are not alone. My father had found that proof, and instead of sharing it with the world, he left it for me. A small compass, a few words, a path. The light grew brighter. Then a voice spoke, not through the radio, not from a machine. Beside me, quiet, familiar. I knew that voice before I turned around. My father. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't need to see him. Some memories do not require a face. They only require a feeling. You finally understand. That was all. For words. But they carried everything. The years of searching. The questions. The fear. The loneliness. I looked across the ocean. The lights reflected nowhere. Just like the first night. But now I understood why. They were never part of the world. I knew. They were something beyond it. Something waiting outside the limits of human understanding. I wanted to ask what would happen next. Where I would go. What was waiting beyond the horizon. But I already knew there were some questions that did not need answers. Some journeys are not about reaching a destination. They are about becoming someone who can finally see it. The voice beside me faded. The lights remained. The ocean stayed perfectly still. And then I noticed something strange. The sky had begun to brighten. A morning should have been arriving, but it never came. The horizon stayed the same. No sunrise. No first light. Only that endless moment between night and day. A place where time seemed to pause. I thought I would be afraid. I wasn't. After everything I had witnessed, I had learned that not every unknown thing was meant to be feared. Some things were simply too large to understand. I sat down near the edge of the platform. The compass rested in my hand. The ocean stretched forever. The lights waited quietly above it. And for the first time in my life, I stopped searching for a way back. Because I finally realized something. I had never been lost. I had been following a path I just couldn't see. The morning never arrived. The horizon never changed. But somehow that was enough. Because I was exactly where I was meant to be.